If you're enjoying this video, smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell. Share it with your friends and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Every like and subscribe helps the channel grow. My name is Thomas Whitfield, and I should have listened to my grandmother's warnings about the hollow. I was born in these mountains 52 years ago, just like my daddy before me, and his daddy before him. We've been rangers here in the great Smoky Mountains for 3 generations. These hills are in my blood, or so I thought. It was October when everything changed. The morning mist hung low over the mountains like ghostly fingers reaching through the trees. I remember thinking how beautiful it looked that day. The trail wound through thick rhododendron bushes and old hemlock trees that had been standing here since before my great-grandfather was born. I took a deep breath of that crisp mountain air and felt peaceful for the first time in months. You see, I'd lost my wife Mary to cancer just 1 year ago. The anniversary of her death was today, and I'd thrown myself into my work to keep from thinking about it too much. My nephew Jamie was with me that morning. He was 16 and visiting for the summer. Good kid, always asking questions about everything. He had one of those fancy new cameras that his daddy bought him, and he was excited to take pictures of the wilderness. "Uncle Thomas, why do they call it a hollow?" Jamie asked as we walked down the narrow trail. My mule Bessie was carrying our supplies, picking her way carefully over the rocks. "That's just what mountain folk call a valley," I told him. "Some hollows are peaceful places. Others—" I paused, remembering my grandmother's stories. "Well, some of them have history." We passed an old moonshine still that had been left to rust since Prohibition days. The metal was all green now, with vines growing through it. Wild turkeys called from the ridges above us, and I could hear black bears moving through the bushes somewhere nearby. Nothing unusual for these mountains. The stream next to the trail was crystal clear, chattering over worn rocks like it had something important to say. Wildflowers covered the forest floor in more colors than seemed possible. Pink lady slippers, purple violets, white trilliums. It was like walking through a painting. "Look at those old houses," Jamie said, pointing to some crumbling stone foundations on the hillsides. Only the chimneys were still standing, like monuments to families. Long gone. I'd grown up hearing stories about those families. Mountain people who'd lived here for generations before the park was made. Some left willingly, others, well, the stories said some never really left at all. My grandmother used to tell me about the old ways when I was Jamie's age. She believed the mountains had spirits and that some places were better left alone. She'd point to certain hollows and say, "Tommy, you stay away from there. There's haints in them hills." As a boy, I'd laughed at her stories. Even as a grown man, I'd always believed that being born in these mountains meant I understood them. I was wrong. That morning, as we walked deeper into the wilderness, I started to feel something I'd never felt before in these hills. Like we were being watched. The back of my neck kept prickling, and Bessie seemed nervous, her ears twitching at sounds I couldn't hear. "Uncle Thomas?" Jamie's voice had gotten quiet. "Do you believe in ghosts?" I was about to tell him no, that ghosts were just stories to scare kids. But then I heard it, a sound that shouldn't have been there. Music, banjo music floating through the trees from somewhere deeper in the hollow. The strange thing was, there shouldn't have been anyone else out there. I knew every family that lived in these mountains, and this section was supposed to be empty. Had been empty for 50 years. "Did you hear that?" I asked Jamie. He nodded, his eyes wide. "Should we go check it out?" I should have said no. Should have turned around right then and headed home. But grief makes a man reckless, and I was still thinking like I knew these mountains better than they knew me. "Just a quick look," I said. That's when I noticed something else odd. My compass was acting strange, the needle pointing toward the center of the hollow, no matter which way I turned. I tapped it against a tree, thinking maybe something was wrong with it. "Mine's doing the same thing," Jamie said, holding up his compass. We kept walking, following the sound of that banjo deeper into the hollow. The trees seemed to grow closer together the further we went, and the light got dimmer, even though it was still early morning. That's when I saw them, the trees. They weren't growing normal. Instead of reaching straight up to the sky, they were all twisted into spiral patterns, like giant corkscrews reaching towards something in the center of the hollow. "Uncle Thomas," Jamie whispered. "Look," he was pointing at something white on the ground. When I got closer, I realized they were bones, deer bones, arranged in perfect circles around some kind of standing stones that I'd never seen before in all my years in these mountains. The banjo music had stopped. I knelt down to look at the bones more carefully. They'd been placed there on purpose, that much was clear. But by who and why? "We should go back," Jamie said, and for the first time his voice had fear in it. I stood up and looked around. The spiral trees, the bone circles, the standing stones, none of this was on any map I'd ever seen, and I'd seen them all. "Yeah," I said finally. "Maybe we should." But as we turned to leave, I realized something that made my blood run cold. The trail we'd followed into the hollow was gone. Where we'd walked in, there was now just thick underbrush and trees growing so close together that a man couldn't squeeze between them. We were trapped in a place that shouldn't exist, with signs of something that had arranged deer bones like a ritual, and the memory of banjo music echoing from empty air. That's when I started to understand what my grandmother had been trying to tell me all those years. Some places in these mountains don't follow the rules of the normal world, and some family curses run deeper than blood. I tried to stay calm for Jamie's sake, but my heart was beating fast. We needed to find another way out of this hollow. I'd been hiking these mountains for 40 years. There had to be another trail. "Stay close to me," I told Jamie, and we started walking around the edge of the bone circles, looking for any path that might lead us home. That's when we found the moonshine operation. It was tucked back behind some old oak trees, with copper, tubing and mason jars scattered around. But something was very wrong with it. The whole setup looked like it had been used recently. The fire pit still had fresh ashes, but there were 3 bodies lying next to it. "Don't look," I told Jamie. But it was too late. He'd already seen them. The bodies were decomposing, but they were wearing modern clothes. One had a park ranger uniform just like mine. The name tag said Wilson. I'd known Bob Wilson. He'd gone missing 3 months ago during a routine patrol. "Uncle Thomas, we need to get out of here," Jamie whispered. I nodded and led him away from the still, but my mind was racing. Bob Wilson was an experienced ranger. What could have killed him out here? We walked for another hour, trying to find a way out. The hollow seemed to go on forever, deeper and deeper into the mountain. The strangest thing was the flowers. Mountain laurel bushes were blooming everywhere, but instead of their usual white and pink flowers, these were completely black. "That's not normal," Jamie said, pointing at them. He was right. Mountain laurel bloomed in spring, not fall, and I'd never seen black flowers before in my life. We came to a stream that I thought might lead us out. Water always flows downhill toward the valleys, and valleys lead to roads. But when I bent down to drink, the water tasted like metal. When I spit it out, my spit was tinged red. "Don't drink that," I told Jamie quickly. Downstream, the rocks were stained rust red, like someone had been bleeding into the water for years. Jamie pulled out his camera to take a picture of the red rocks. "This is so weird," he said, snapping. "Photos. I can't wait to show Dad." While he was taking pictures, I heard voices coming from up ahead. Relief flooded through me. Other people meant we could find our way out. "Hello," I called out. "We need help." The voices stopped. Then I heard footsteps coming toward us through the trees, but when the people stepped into view, my blood went cold. They were wearing old-fashioned clothes, long dresses and suspenders, like something from 100 years ago. Their faces were pale and their eyes were empty, like looking into deep, dark wells. "You shouldn't be here," one of them said in a voice that sounded like wind through dead leaves. "We're just lost," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can you help us find the trail back to the main road?" They didn't answer. They just stared at us with those empty eyes. Then, one by one, they started walking backward into the trees until we couldn't see them anymore. Jamie grabbed my arm. "Hey, Uncle Thomas, did you see that? They were walking backward, but they never turned around." I had seen it, and I'd seen something else too. The woman in the front row had been my great-grandmother. I'd seen her picture in our family album. But she'd been dead for 60 years. We kept walking more urgently now. The sun was getting lower, and I didn't want to be in this hollow after dark. That's when we found the cabin. It was small and made of logs, sitting in a little clearing. Smoke was coming from the chimney, and there were fresh clothes hanging on a line outside. Finally, real people who could help us. I knocked on the door. "Hello? Anyone home?" A woman's voice called from inside. "Come in, Thomas. I've been waiting. For you." The door wasn't locked, so I pushed it open. Jamie followed me inside. The cabin was simple, just one room with a fireplace, a table, and a bed. An old woman sat in a rocking chair by the fire. When she turned to look at us, I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. It was my grandmother, the same grandmother, who'd been dead for 15 years. "Sit down, Tommy," she said in that same gentle voice I remembered from childhood. "You and the boy need to rest." "Grandma," I whispered. Jamie looked confused. "Uncle Thomas, who is this lady?" My grandmother smiled. "The boy can't see me clearly yet, but you can, can't you, Tommy? Because you have the sight, just like I did." I sat down heavily in a chair across from her. "You're dead, Grandma. I went to your funeral." "Death isn't the end in these mountains," she said. "Especially not for our family. We've been tied to this hollow for generations." She reached into a basket next to her chair and pulled out an old leather journal. "Your great-great-grandfather wrote this when he first came to these mountains. In 1825. Read it, Tommy. You need to understand what you're dealing with." I opened the journal with shaking hands. The pages were yellow and brittle, but the writing was still clear. October 15th, 1825. Something hunts us in the hollow. Found Sarah's body torn apart near the creek. The Cherokee say it's punishment for settling on cursed land. It has a woman's face but moves like a great cat. It knows our names. October 20th, 1825. Lost 3 more children. The thing speaks to us in their voices. We cannot leave. Every trail leads back to the hollow. October 25th, 1825. Made deal with the beast. It will let others live if one from each generation feeds its hunger. The curse will pass to my children's children. I looked up at my grandmother. "What does this mean?" "It means you're not the first Whitfield to find himself trapped in this hollow," she said sadly. "And unless you're very careful, you won't be the last." The fire in the fireplace suddenly went out, leaving us in darkness. Outside, something large moved through the trees, something that shouldn't exist. "It knows you're here now," my grandmother whispered. "The Wampus cat has been waiting for you, Tommy. It's been waiting for a very long time." The darkness outside, the cabin, felt alive. I could hear something moving around the building, circling us like a predator. Heavy footsteps that didn't sound quite right. Too big for a person, too careful for a bear. "What is a Wampus cat?" Jamie whispered. My grandmother's voice came from the darkness where her chair was. "A creature that should never have been born. Half woman, half mountain lion. It feeds on pain and family blood." A low growling sound came from just outside the window. I grabbed Jamie's hand and pulled him away from it. "Tell me how to stop it," I said to my grandmother. You can't stop it, Tommy. You can only make a deal with it like your ancestors did. One life from each generation, and it lets the others live. No, I said firmly. There has to be another way. The cabin door suddenly burst open. Cold wind rushed in, along with the smell of wet earth and something else, something rotten. The fire sparked back to life, casting dancing shadows on the walls. In the doorway stood the largest cat I'd ever seen. It was easily 6 feet long, with muscles that rippled under black fur. But the worst part was its face. It had a woman's face, with long dark hair and yellow eyes that glowed in the firelight. "Thomas Whitfield," it said in a voice like honey mixed with gravel. "I've been waiting for you." Jamie screamed and pressed himself against the wall. The creature ignored him completely, keeping its yellow eyes fixed on me. "You look just like your great-grandfather," it said, stepping into the cabin. He was delicious. I stood up slowly, putting myself between the creature and Jamie. "What do you want?" "The same thing I've always wanted," it said, sitting back on its haunches like a house cat. "To finish what we started. Your family owes me a debt." "We don't owe you anything," I said. The creature laughed, and the sound made my skin crawl. "Oh, but you do. Your ancestors made a deal. 1 life per generation. Your father should have paid, but he died in that car accident before I could claim him. My father had died when I was 25. I'd always wondered why he'd driven off that mountain road on a clear, sunny day." "So the debt fell to you," the creature continued. "But you've been so careful, staying on the main trails, never venturing into the deep woods alone. Until today, I realized it had been hunting me for years, waiting for me to make a mistake. The boy doesn't need to be involved," I said. "This is between you and me." "Is it?" The creature turned its human eyes toward Jamie. "He has Whitfield. Blood too. The curse passes to him as well." "No," I said quickly. "Take me instead." The creature smiled with too many teeth. "Oh, I will. But not yet. First, I want you to understand what you're dealing with." It stood up and began to change. Its body stretched and shifted until it looked like my wife Mary, standing there in her favorite blue dress. "Hello, Thomas," it said in Mary's voice. "I've missed you so much." "You're not her," I said, but my voice cracked. It looked exactly like Mary, down to the small scar on her chin from when she fell off her bike as a child. "Remember our last day together," it said, still in Mary's voice. "When you promised to take care of yourself after I was gone. You haven't been taking care of yourself, have you, Thomas?" Tears started running down my face. It was exactly what Mary had said to me in the hospital. "He's crying," the false Mary said, looking at Jamie. "How sweet. Do you know what it feels like to watch someone you love waste away, to be helpless while they suffer?" Then it changed again, becoming Jamie's mother, my sister, Sarah. "Thomas," it said in Sarah's voice, "how could you let something happen to my boy? I trusted you to keep him safe." "Stop it," I said. "But I'm just getting started," it said, changing again. Now it looked like Bob Wilson, the missing park ranger. "Help me, Thomas. It's been so cold down here. Why didn't you come looking for me?" I closed my eyes, trying to block out the voices. But I could still hear it changing, becoming person after person I'd known and lost. "The thing about grief, Thomas," it said, now back in its cat form, "is that it makes you weak. It makes you want to give up. And I feed on that weakness." I opened my eyes and saw Jamie staring at the creature with a blank expression on his face. "That's right," the creature purred. "The boy is already mine. He can hear his parents calling him from the hollow. They want him to come home." "Jamie, don't listen to it," I said, grabbing his shoulder. But when I looked into his eyes, they were empty, just like the eyes of those people we'd met by the stream. "He belongs to me now," the creature said, "just like his parents will when I'm done with your family line." "My grandmother said there was a way to banish you," I said desperately. The creature laughed again. "Your grandmother?" Look around, Thomas. Do you see her? I turned to where my grandmother had been sitting. The rocking chair was empty. There was no basket, no journal, just an old, dusty cabin that had been abandoned. For years, the grief is making you see things, the creature said. You read that journal in your own house weeks ago. You brought it with you, hoping to understand your family's history. Check your backpack. With shaking hands, I opened my backpack. The journal was there, along with a note in my own handwriting. Investigate the hollow where great-great-grandfathers' family disappeared. You came here looking for answers, the creature said, and now you have them. Your family has been cursed for generations, and I am that curse. I looked at Jamie again. He was staring at nothing, a slight smile on his face, like he was listening to something wonderful. What do you want me to do? I asked. Nothing, the creature said. Just wait. The boy will come to me willingly soon, and then it will be your turn. Outside, I could hear other voices calling. Children's voices, singing old mountain songs. Voices that shouldn't exist. The creature was right about one thing. I had come here looking for answers. But I still had one more card to play. Something my real grandmother had taught me long ago. Something the creature didn't know I remembered. Iron. Mountain folk had always believed that iron could protect against evil spirits. I reached slowly into my pocket, where I always carried my great-grandfather's hunting knife. The handle was old iron, worn smooth by generations of Whitfield hands. The creature saw the movement, and its eyes narrowed. What are you doing, Thomas? Something I should have done a long time ago, I said, and pulled out the knife. The creature hissed when it saw the iron blade. Its yellow eyes flashed with anger, and for the first time it looked afraid. That won't help you, it snarled, but I could hear uncertainty in its voice. My grandmother told me stories about iron, I said, holding the knife steady. She said, mountain spirits can't touch it. The creature backed toward the door. Your grandmother is dead, Thomas. You're talking to yourself. Maybe she is dead, I said, but that doesn't mean she was wrong. I stepped forward, and the creature moved back again. Its fur was standing up like an angry house cat's, and it was making a low, growling sound. Jamie, I called over my shoulder. Can you hear me? My nephew didn't answer. He was still staring at nothing with that empty smile on his face. He's mine now, the creature said. Even if you drive me away, he'll follow the voices down into the deepest part of the hollow. He'll become like the others. What others? All the children who've wandered into my domain over the years. They make such lovely companions. I felt sick thinking about Bob Wilson and the other bodies we'd found. How many people had this thing killed? But I'll make you a deal, the creature said, its voice becoming sweet again. Give me the knife and I'll let you both leave. You can go home and forget this ever happened. I don't believe you. Smart man. You're right not to trust me. But answer me this. What if you're wrong about the knife? What if it doesn't work? Then you'll have wasted your only chance to save the boy. I hesitated. The knife felt heavy in my hand, and I wasn't even sure if the old stories were true. What if my grandmother had just been telling stories to scare kids? Choose quickly, the creature said. The boy is sinking deeper every second. Soon no power on earth will bring him back. I looked at Jamie. His smile was getting wider, and he was starting to hum one of those children's songs I'd heard outside. That's when I made my decision. Maybe the knife wouldn't work. Maybe I'd die trying to use it. But I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try to save Jamie. Here's my choice, I said, and lunged forward with the blade. The creature screamed and jumped aside, but not fast enough. The iron knife sliced across its shoulder, and black blood splattered onto the cabin floor. The wound sizzled like acid on metal. The creature staggered, its form flickering between cat and human. Impossible, it gasped. You can't hurt me. I am eternal. Maybe you are, I said, advancing again. But iron still hurts, doesn't it? The creature fled through the open door. I chased after it, leaving Jamie in the cabin. Outside, the sound of children singing was getting louder. In the clearing behind the cabin, I saw them. Dozens of children, all dressed in clothes from different time periods. Some wore pioneer dresses and overalls, others had on more modern clothing. They stood in a circle, holding hands and singing. The creature crouched in the center of the circle, black blood dripping from its wound. "You see them now," it said. "All the children I've collected over the years, happy children who never have to grow up and face the pain of the world." I realized with horror that these were all the kids who'd gone missing in these mountains over the past century. Lost hikers, runaway children, kids who'd wandered too far from their campgrounds. "Let them go," I said. "I can't," the creature replied. "They're part of me now, but I can add one more to the circle. Your nephew is already on his way." I turned and saw Jamie walking out of the cabin toward us. His eyes were still empty, but he was smiling that terrible, peaceful smile. "Jamie, stop!" I shouted. He didn't seem to hear me. He walked straight toward the circle of children. When he was a few feet away, they opened the circle to let him in. I had to choose. I could attack the creature again, maybe kill it, but Jamie would be lost forever. Or I could save Jamie and let the creature escape to hunt again. As I stood there, frozen with indecision, I heard a familiar voice. "Use the old words, Tommy." I turned and saw my grandmother standing at the edge of the clearing. But this time, I could see right through her. "Grandma?" Cherokee words mixed with Christian prayer, she said. "The iron blade is just the beginning. You need to banish it back to where it came from." "I don't know any Cherokee words." "Yes, you do. I taught them to you when you were small. You've just forgotten." And suddenly I did remember. Words my grandmother had whispered to me during thunderstorms, when I was scared and couldn't sleep. Words that sounded like wind through leaves and water over stones. I raised the iron knife above my head and began to speak the old words. I didn't fully understand what they meant, but I felt their power. The creature screamed again as I spoke. Its form began to waver, like heat rising from hot pavement. "No!" it gasped. "The pact! Your family owes me." "The pact is broken," I said, continuing. The chant, the circle of children began to fade. One by one they smiled peaceful smiles and disappeared like morning mist. Jamie blinked and looked around, confused. "Uncle Thomas, where are we?" The creature made one last desperate lunge at me, but it was already becoming transparent. The knife passed right through it. "This isn't over," it whispered as it faded away. "The curse runs deeper than you know." Then it was gone. The clearing was empty except for me and Jamie standing in the early evening light. "Come on," I said, taking his hand. "Let's go home." We found the trail back easily. It was right where it should have been, clear and well marked. By the time we reached my truck, I was starting to wonder if any of it had really happened. But when I got home and looked at Jamie's photos from his camera, I knew it had been real. The pictures showed figures in the forest that we hadn't seen with our eyes. And in one photo, taken just before we found the cabin, there was a dark shape with yellow eyes watching us from behind a tree. I never told anyone the full story of what happened in that hollow. I couldn't. Who would believe it? Jamie doesn't remember anything after we got lost. The doctors say it's trauma-related memory loss. I let them think that. I did make 2 changes in my life after that day. First, I transferred to a different part of the park, far away from that particular hollow. And second, I wrote down everything that happened just like my ancestors did. Because, cursed or not, knowledge should be passed down. Sometimes, on dark nights when the wind is howling through the mountains, I think I can still hear children singing in the distance. But I don't go looking for them anymore. Some places are better left alone. And some family secrets are burdens that each generation has to carry, one way or another. My name is Michael Yazzie, and I'm a park ranger at Canyon de Chelly in Arizona. I've been working here for 5 years now. protecting this sacred land that my grandfather's grandfather once called home. Today started like any other day, but something felt different from the moment I woke up. The sun was just coming up behind the red rocks when I got to the canyon. The light made everything glow like fire. The cliffs, the ancient ruins, even the sand under my feet. I loved this time of morning. It was quiet, peaceful, just me, my horse Spirit, and my dog Coda. But today, something was wrong. Spirit kept shaking his head and stomping his feet. His ears were flat against his head, like when thunder is coming. But the sky was clear. Not a cloud anywhere. Coda was acting strange too. He usually ran ahead, sniffing everything, his tail wagging. Today, he stayed close to me, whimpering softly. "What's wrong, boy?" I asked, scratching behind his ears. He just looked up at me with his brown eyes like he was trying to tell me something important. The wind was blowing harder than usual. It made a weird sound when it went through the rocks, like someone whistling a song I couldn't quite remember. My grandfather used to say the wind carries messages from the spirits. I never believed him when I was young. Now, I wasn't so sure. I checked my radio. Static. That was normal out here, but today it sounded different, like voices talking far away. I turned it off. We started riding deeper into the canyon. This was my favorite part of the job. Patrolling the old Anasazi ruins, making sure tourists hadn't left trash or damaged anything. These ruins were over 1,000 years old. People lived here, raised families, told stories around fires. Now they were gone, but their houses still stood in the rocks above us. I looked up at the ruins and felt like someone was watching me. I'd felt this before, lots of rangers did. We called it ancient eyes, but today it felt stronger, like whoever was watching wasn't happy to see me. Spirit stopped walking. I tried to make him move, but he wouldn't budge. He was staring at something ahead of us. I followed his gaze and saw a kit fox sitting on a rock about 50 feet away. It wasn't moving, just watching us. Foxes usually run when they see people. This one just sat there like it was studying us. Probably just curious, I told myself. But my grandmother's voice whispered in my head, "When the animals act strange, listen to them. They see things we don't." The temperature dropped suddenly. One minute I was warm in my jacket, the next I was shivering. Dark clouds had moved over the sun, but I hadn't seen them coming. The shadows they made looked like shapes, like people walking across the canyon floor. My radio started making noise again. I turned it back on, and through the static, I could hear something that made my blood run cold. It sounded like chanting. Oh, chanting in a language I recognized, but wished I didn't. Navajo, but there was no one else here. I'd checked the visitor center. No tour groups today, no other rangers in this section, just me, Spirit, and Coda. The fox was still watching us. I blinked, and suddenly it was gone. Not running away, just gone. "Come on, Spirit," I said, patting his neck. "Let's keep moving." But Spirit didn't want to move. He kept looking back the way we came, like he wanted to go home. I understood how he felt. For the first time in 5 years, I wanted to leave the canyon too. My ex-wife Sarah used to say I spent too much time listening to my grandfather's stories. "It's the 21st century, Michael," she'd say. "There's no such thing as monsters." She left me last year, said she couldn't live with a man who believed in superstitious nonsense. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was just scaring myself. But as we rode deeper into the canyon, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. The rocks above us seemed to be watching. The shadows between them looked like they were moving, and somewhere in the distance I could swear I heard footsteps following us. Coda stayed pressed against Spirit's side, whimpering. Spirit's ears kept turning back, listening for something. And me, I kept my hand on the radio, even though I knew it wouldn't work if I really needed help. My grandfather's voice echoed in my memory. "Some things in this world should never be disturbed, Michael. Some places are meant to stay empty. When the spirits warn you to leave, you listen. I should have listened to him then. I should have turned around and ridden back to the visitor center, but I was a park ranger. This was my job, my responsibility. I had no idea that by staying, I was walking into the most terrifying night of my life. The canyon stretched ahead of us, red rocks reaching up to touch the grey sky. Somewhere in that maze of stone and shadow, something was waiting for us. Something that had been waiting for a very long time. We'd been riding for about an hour when Spirit suddenly stopped again. This time he wouldn't move no matter what I did. His whole body was shaking like he was cold, but it wasn't cold anymore. The sun had come out from behind the clouds, and it was getting warm. I got off Spirit and walked ahead to see what was bothering him. That's when I saw them, footprints in the sand. At first they looked normal, like someone had been walking barefoot. But as I followed them with my eyes, something was wrong. The prints started out looking like human feet, but they got longer and stranger the further they went. By the end, they didn't look human at all. Probably just the sand shifting, I told myself, but my voice sounded small in the big empty canyon. I pulled out my compass to check our direction. The needle was spinning around and around like a broken toy. I tapped it with my finger, but it kept spinning. My watch had stopped too. It said 3:33, but I knew that wasn't right. Coda started barking. Not his normal happy bark. This was different. Scared. Angry. I looked where he was barking and saw a circle in the sand about 20 feet away. I walked over to it. Even though every part of me wanted to turn around and leave, it was made of white ash. Perfectly round, like someone had drawn it with a giant compass. Inside the circle were animal bones arranged in patterns I didn't understand. They were white and clean, like they'd been sitting in the sun for years. The smell hit me then, like rotten eggs mixed with something dead. Coda backed away, whimpering. Even I had to cover my nose with my shirt. That's when I found the clothes. They were buried under some rocks, like someone had tried to hide them. A park ranger uniform, just like mine. The name tag said Williams. I knew him. Dave Williams had gone missing 3 months ago. They found his truck at the canyon entrance, but never found him. The clothes were covered in dark stains that looked like blood. But that wasn't the worst part. Someone had drawn symbols on them with what looked like burned sticks. Symbols that made my skin crawl just looking at them. My radio crackled to life. Through the static, I heard a voice. Michael, I grabbed the radio. Hello, who is this? Do you need help? Silence. Then the voice again, clearer this time. Michael, come here. The voice sounded like my grandfather, but that was impossible. He'd been dead for 10 years. Grandpa, I whispered into the radio, come here, boy. I'm waiting for you. My hands were shaking. I looked around the canyon, but I didn't see anyone. The voice was coming from the radio, but it sounded like it was all around me too. Spirit was pulling on his rope, trying to get away. Coda had stopped barking and was hiding behind a rock, his tail between his legs. Smart animals know when to be afraid. I should have listened to them. Instead, I started walking toward where the voice seemed to be coming from, deeper into the canyon. Where the rocks got taller and the shadows got darker, the fog came from nowhere. 1 minute the sky was clear, the next minute thick grey fog was rolling in like water. But fog doesn't happen in the desert like this. The air was still dry, still warm. As I walked, I noticed something else wrong. The trail markers, orange tags on metal poles that show the safe paths, had been moved. They were pointing in a different direction now, leading away from the main trail and toward a part of the canyon I'd never been to, the part my grandfather had told me to stay away from. Some places are not for the living, he used to say. Some places belong to things that were here before us. I was getting scared now, really scared, but I kept walking. The fog was getting thicker, and I could barely see 10 feet ahead. Coda was following me, but he stayed far behind like he didn't want to get too close to whatever was ahead. Then I heard something that made my blood turn to ice. Footsteps. Behind me. I stopped and turned around, but I couldn't see anything in the fog. The footsteps stopped too, I started walking again. The footsteps started again. Someone was following me. "Hello?" I called out. "Is someone there?" No answer, just the sound of feet on sand, matching my steps exactly. I walked faster. The footsteps walked faster. I started running. The footsteps started running too. But here's the thing that really scared me. The footsteps sounded exactly like mine. Same rhythm, same weight, like someone was copying me perfectly. I ran until I couldn't breathe anymore, then stopped behind a big rock to catch my breath. Everything was quiet, too quiet. Even the wind had stopped. That's when I realized I was completely lost. The fog had turned me around so many times I didn't know which way I'd come from, and Spirit was gone. I couldn't hear him or see him anywhere. I called his name, but my voice just disappeared into the fog, like it was swallowing the sound. I was alone in the canyon, with something that was following me, something that sounded like me when it walked, something that knew my name. I stayed behind that rock for what felt like hours, listening. The fog was so thick I couldn't see my own hands when I held them out in front of me. My heart was beating so loud I was afraid whatever was out there could hear it. Then I heard Spirit neighing somewhere far away. He sounded scared, like he was in trouble. "Spirit!" I called out and started, running toward the sound. That was a mistake. I ran straight into someone standing in the fog. We crashed into each other, and I fell backward onto the sand. "Sorry, sorry," I said, scrambling to get up. "I didn't see you there." The person helped me stand up. It was another park ranger wearing the same uniform as me. He had a friendly face and a big smile. "No worries, Michael," he said. "These canyons can be tricky in the fog." Something was wrong. His voice sounded normal, but something about his smile didn't look right. And how did he know my name? "I'm sorry. Do I know you?" I asked. "Of course you do. We work together every day." He kept smiling, but his eyes didn't blink, not once. I looked closer at his face. His skin looked wrong, like it was too tight or like it didn't quite fit, and his smile was too wide, showing too many teeth. "What's your name?" I asked, backing away slowly. "You know my name, Michael. I'm Dave Williams." My blood went cold. Dave Williams was the ranger who'd gone missing, the one whose bloody clothes I'd just found. "That's not possible," I whispered. "Dave is dead." The thing wearing Dave's face tilted its head like a dog. "Who told you that?" I turned and ran into the fog as fast as I could. Behind me I heard laughter, but it wasn't coming from where the fake Dave was standing. It was coming from everywhere at once. The fog started to clear as I ran, and I could see the canyon walls again. But something was still wrong. The rocks looked different. The shadows were in the wrong places. It was like I was in a different canyon entirely. I found a narrow path between two tall rocks and squeezed through it, hoping to hide. On the other side was a small clearing with an old hogan, a traditional Navajo house made of wood and mud. But it looked abandoned, like no one had lived there for years. I crept closer and peeked through the doorway. Inside, I could see someone sitting by a small fire, an old Navajo man in traditional clothes. "Grandfather?" I whispered. The old man looked up at me and smiled. "Come in, Michael. I've been waiting for you." It was my grandfather's face, exactly like I remembered. But my grandfather had been buried 10 years ago. I'd been to his funeral. I'd helped carry his coffin. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. Part of me wanted so badly for it to be real. I missed him so much. "Come sit with me," he said, patting the ground next to him. "We need to talk." I took a step toward the hogan, then stopped. Something about the way he moved wasn't right. My grandfather had arthritis in his hands. They always shook a little. This man's hands were perfectly steady. "You're not my grandfather," I said. The thing wearing his face stopped smiling. "Of course I am. Don't you recognize your own grandfather?" My grandfather had a scar on his chin from when he fell off a horse as a kid. "You don't." The fake grandfather's face started to change. The features shifted and melted like wax near A fire. The kind eyes became yellow and mean. The wrinkled skin became gray and stretched. Very observant, it said in a voice that wasn't human anymore. But it doesn't matter. You're mine now. I ran again, leaving the Hogan behind. But now I could hear voices calling my name from every direction. Some sounded like my grandfather. Others sounded like Dave Williams. One sounded like my ex-wife, Sarah. "Michael, help me!" Sarah's voice called from somewhere to my left. "Don't leave me here!" Dave's voice called from the right. "Come back, boy!" My grandfather's voice called from behind, but I kept running straight ahead, not turning toward any of the voices. My real grandfather had taught me something when I was little. If something seems too good to be true, it probably isn't true. Trust your gut, not your heart. The fog was completely gone now, and I could see I was in a part of the canyon I'd never seen before. The rocks here were black instead of red, and they were covered in strange paintings. Not like the ancient petroglyphs I knew. These looked fresh, like someone had painted them recently. They showed figures that looked like people, but wrong. Too tall, too thin, with arms that went down to the ground. And in the middle of them, all was a painting of a creature that made my skin crawl just looking at it. It had the body of a man, but the head of an animal. Its eyes were painted with something that glowed, even in daylight. And around it were smaller figures that looked like they were dancing or bowing down to it. That's when I heard the howling, not like a wolf or a coyote. This was different. It sounded like a person trying to sound like an animal, but not quite getting it right. Like someone who had heard a wolf howl, but had never been a wolf. The howling was getting closer. I looked around desperately for somewhere to hide, but the canyon walls were too smooth to climb, and there were no caves or overhangs. That's when I saw Coda running toward me, barking happily. My heart jumped with relief. At least my dog was okay. But as he got closer, something about his run looked wrong. He was running on his back legs like a person, his front paws dangling in the air. His head was tilted at an angle that would have broken a real dog's neck, and when he opened his mouth to bark, I saw human teeth. I turned and ran deeper into the canyon, and the thing that looked like my dog followed, still barking, with that horrible human mouth. Behind us, the howling got louder and closer, and I realized that whatever was hunting me wasn't just copying voices anymore, it was copying everything. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like they were going to give out. The fake Coda was still following me, making those awful barking sounds with its human mouth. But worse than that, I could hear more things behind it. Footsteps that sounded like people walking, but too many of them, like a whole crowd was following me. The canyon was getting narrower. The walls were closing in on both sides, and I realized I was heading into a dead end. There was nowhere left to run. I turned around to face whatever was chasing me, and my whole body went cold. There were 5 of them. One looked like Dave Williams, still wearing that too wide smile. One looked like my grandfather, but with those yellow glowing eyes. One looked like Sarah, my ex-wife, but her neck was bent at a wrong angle. One looked like me, exactly like me, down to the small scar on my forehead from when I fell off my bike as a kid. And in the middle of them all was something that didn't look like anything I'd ever seen. It was tall as a man, but skinny like a stick. Its arms hung down almost to the ground. Its skin was gray and looked like leather that had been left in the sun too long. But the worst part was its face. It had no face, just smooth skin where a face should be, except for 2 holes for eyes. The holes were deep and dark, like looking into a well at night. "Hello, Michael," they all said at the same time, in perfect harmony. Even the faceless one somehow talked, though it had no mouth. I pressed my back against the canyon wall, feeling the rough rock against my shirt. There was nowhere left to go. "What do you want?" I managed to say. "We want what you took," the one that looked like me said. "I didn't take anything. You took our peace," said the fake grandfather. "You brought noise to our quiet place." "You brought light to our darkness," said the fake Sarah. "You brought life to our dead space," said the fake Dave. The faceless one stepped forward. "Now you must give us something in return." They started walking toward me, moving in perfect step, like they were all controlled by the same mind. I looked around desperately for anything that could help me. That's when I remembered my grandmother. Before she died, she had given me a small bag of sand. "This isn't regular sand," she had told me. "This is from the sacred place where I was born. If you're ever in real trouble, pour it in a circle around yourself and pray to the ancestors. They will protect you." I had always carried it with me, but I'd never believed it would actually work. It was just sand, right? But right now, sand was all I had. I pulled the small leather bag from my pocket with shaking hands. The things that looked like people were only 10 feet away now. I could smell them, like old meat and burned hair. I poured the sand in a circle around myself, making it as round as I could. As soon as I finished, something amazing happened. The fake people stopped walking. They stood at the edge of the sand circle like there was an invisible wall they couldn't cross. The one that looked like me reached out its hand, but when it got close to the sand, it pulled back like it had been burned. "Clever boy," the faceless one said, "but that won't save you forever." That's when I heard barking, real barking this. And it was getting closer. Coda came running around the corner, the real Coda. He saw the fake dog that looked like him and started growling, his fur standing up all over his body. Then he looked at the other fake people and really lost it. He was barking and snarling like I'd never seen him do before, but something terrible was happening to him. His eyes started turning yellow, just like theirs. His barks were changing, becoming more like human words. The real Coda was fighting it, shaking his head and whimpering, but I could see the change taking over. "No," I whispered. "Not Coda." The faceless one laughed. It was the most horrible sound I'd ever heard. "Your friend wants to join us. Soon you'll be all alone." Coda's eyes were completely yellow now. He stopped barking and started walking toward the other fake creatures. But every few steps he would stop and shake his head, like he was trying to remember who he really was. "Coda!" I called out. "Fight it! Remember who you are!" For a second, his eyes turned brown again. He looked at me with love and loyalty, like he always had. Then he looked at the faceless creature and growled, but the yellow was coming back into his eyes. I had to do something fast, before I lost him forever. That's when I heard hoofbeats. Spirit came charging around the corner, moving faster than I'd ever seen him run. But instead of running toward me, he ran straight at the group of fake people. He slammed into the one that looked like me, knocking it down. Then he reared up on his back legs and brought his hooves down on the one that looked like Sarah, but they just got back up, like nothing had happened, and now Spirit was surrounded, just like I was. The faceless creature looked at me with those deep dark holes where its eyes should be. "Your animals cannot save you," it said. "Your sand cannot save you forever. When the sun goes down, your protection will end, and then you will join us." I looked up at the sky. The sun was getting low, painting the canyon walls red and orange. In maybe an hour, it would be dark. And somehow, I knew that when night fell, the sand circle wouldn't protect me anymore. I was trapped, with my dog slowly becoming one of them, and my horse surrounded by monsters that looked like people. And the sun was going down. The sun kept sinking lower and lower in the sky. The fake people stood around my sand circle like they were waiting for dinner time. The faceless one kept staring at me with those empty holes where its eyes should be. Coda was fighting harder now. His eyes would flash yellow, then brown, then yellow again. He was whimpering and shaking his head like he was trying to shake off a bad dream. But I could see him losing the fight. Spirit was still surrounded, but the creatures weren't hurting him. They were just watching him, like they were waiting for something. "Why don't you just leave us alone?" I shouted at the faceless one. "Because you trespassed," it said in that voice that came from nowhere. "This is our home, has been for hundreds of years. Your people built roads through our hunting grounds, brought tourists to our sacred places, made noise where there should be silence. We didn't know. Of course you knew. The fake grandfather stepped forward. Your real grandfather told you. Your grandmother told you. But you didn't listen. You thought the old ways were just stories. He was right. They had tried to warn me. But I was young and smart and modern. I thought I knew better. So what happens now? I asked. Now you become like us, the fake me said. We take your shape, your voice, your memories. We go back to your world and make more like us, one by one, until there are no real people left. The sun was touching the top of the canyon walls now, maybe 30 minutes of daylight left. That's when I remembered something else my grandmother had told me. If the sand doesn't work, she had said, pray to your grandfather's spirit. The dead can fight the dead. I had never prayed like she taught me. I always felt silly doing it. But now, with nothing left to lose, I got down on my knees in the sand circle. I closed my eyes and spoke in Navajo, the way my grandfather had taught me when I was little. I called to his spirit, begged him to help me. I promised to respect the old ways, to listen to the warnings, to protect the sacred places. At first, nothing happened. The fake people kept standing there waiting. Coda kept fighting the yellow in his eyes. Then the wind started blowing, not the normal desert wind. This was different. It felt warm and it smelled like sage and cedar, like my grandmother's house. When I was young, the temperature dropped fast. My breath started making clouds in the air, even though it had been hot all day. Then I saw him. My real grandfather standing behind the faceless creature. He looked exactly like I remembered him, the scar on his chin, his hands shaking slightly, his kind eyes full of love and strength. But this time, he wasn't alone. There were others with him, old Navajo people in traditional clothes. They stood in a line behind the fake people, blocking their way to the canyon entrance. You will not have this boy, my grandfather said to the faceless one. His voice was strong and clear. He is under our protection now. The faceless creature turned around and saw the spirits. For the first time since I'd met it, it seemed scared. The boy broke the laws, it said. He came where he should not come. The boy is learning, another spirit said. An old woman who looked like my grandmother. He will do better. He will guard the sacred places, my grandfather added. He will make sure no one disturbs your rest again. The fake people were starting to look less solid, like they were made of smoke instead of flesh. The yellow was leaving Coda's eyes, and he was looking like himself again, but the faceless creature wasn't giving up. If not the boy, then the animals, it hissed. That's when Coda did something amazing. He charged straight at the faceless creature, barking and snarling. But just before he reached it, my grandfather's spirit stepped in front of him. You cannot have them either, he said. The faceless creature reached out with its long arms, trying to grab Coda, but its hands passed right through my grandfather, like he was made of air. The spirits of my ancestors formed a circle around me, Coda and spirit. They started chanting in the old language, words that made the fake people stumble backward like they were being pushed by invisible hands. The sun was almost gone now, just a thin line of orange on the horizon. This isn't over, the faceless creature said. We will find other trespassers, other people who don't listen to the warnings. Maybe, my grandfather said, but not this one, never this one again. The last bit of sunlight disappeared behind the canyon wall. In that moment, when day became night, something incredible happened. The fake people didn't get stronger like they thought they would. Instead, they started fading away like morning fog. The spirits of my ancestors got brighter and clearer, and the protective sand circle around me began to glow with a soft, warm light. The faceless creature looked at me one last time. Remember your promise, it said, and then it was gone. All of them were gone, like they had never been there at all. The spirits of my ancestors stood around me for a few more minutes. My grandfather smiled at me the way he used to when I was little and had learned something important. "You understand now," he said. "I understand," I replied in Navajo. "Good. Take care of this place. Keep others safe. And always remember, some things are older than you, older than all of us. They deserve respect." Then they were gone too, and I was alone with Coda and Spirit under the stars. We made it back to the ranger station the next morning. I wrote up a report, but I didn't tell them what really happened. Who would believe me? I just said I got lost in the fog and had to camp overnight. But things changed after that night. I put up new signs at the canyon entrance, warning people to stay on the marked trails. I started learning more of the old language from the tribal elders, and whenever tour groups came through, I made sure to tell them about respecting sacred places. The elders weren't surprised when I came to them for lessons. It was like they had been expecting me. "Your grandfather told us you would come," one of them said, "when you were ready to listen." I never saw the skinwalker again, but sometimes I feel it watching from the deep parts of the canyon, waiting for someone else who doesn't listen to warnings, someone else who thinks the old stories are just made up. I've been protecting Canyon de Chelly for 15 years now. I've never spoken English while I'm working there, only Navajo and the other old languages the elders taught me, and I always carry a bag of sacred sand just in case, because I learned something that night that I'll never forget. Some things in this world are bigger and older and more dangerous than we can imagine. And the only way to stay safe is to respect them, listen to the warnings, and never ever think you know better than your ancestors. The canyon is quiet now, peaceful like it should be. But I know it's always watching, always listening, and I'm always watching back. My name is Rebecca Foster, and I need to tell you about what happened at Pictured Rocks National Lakeshore in October of 1984. Most people won't believe me, but I have to get this story out there. Maybe it will save someone's life. I was 35 years old then, working as a park ranger at the lighthouse on Lake Superior. I chose that job because I wanted to be alone, far away from people, far away from memories that kept me awake at night. You see, I used to be in the Navy search and rescue. I saved a lot of people from drowning, but I couldn't save my own crew when our helicopter went down. That was 5 years before I came to Michigan. The lighthouse stood on top of tall cliffs, made of colorful rock, red, orange, and yellow sandstone that looked pretty during sunny days. But in October, especially when storms came, it looked different, dark, scary, like the rocks were bleeding. I wasn't completely alone out there. I had my German shepherd, Thor. He was a big, strong dog who used to help with rescue work. Thor was smart, smarter than most people I knew. He could sense things before I could. That dog saved my life more times than I can count. The day everything started going wrong was October 15th. I remember because I wrote it in my daily log. The weather had been strange all week. One minute it was warm like summer. The next minute, it was freezing cold. The lake kept changing colors too, from blue to gray to almost black. That morning, the wind started howling something fierce. It wasn't a normal wind. This one sounded angry, like it was trying to tell me something. The trees around the lighthouse bent so far I thought they might break. Dead leaves flew everywhere, hitting the windows like tiny fists. I was checking the lighthouse equipment when the temperature dropped. I'm talking about a drop so fast I could see my breath in seconds. Frost started forming on the metal railings, even though it was still afternoon. Thor started acting weird too. He kept looking out at the lake and whining. That's when I heard it on the radio. Static at first, then what sounded like screaming, but not human screaming. Something else, something that made the hair on my arms stand up. I fiddled with the radio dial, thinking it was just interference from the storm, but the sounds kept coming through. I grabbed my binoculars and looked out at the lake. There was A fog bank rolling in from the north, but this wasn't normal fog. It moved too fast, too straight, like it had a purpose. As I watched, it swallowed up the small islands one by one, just made them disappear. The birds knew something was wrong. 2. All day I'd been watching flocks of geese and ducks flying inland, away from the lake. That wasn't normal for this time of year. They should have been heading south along the shoreline. Instead, they were flying as fast as they could toward the forest. As the sun started to go down, I turned on the lighthouse. Beacon. It was one of the most powerful lights on the Great Lakes, could be seen for 20 miles on a clear night. But when that beam cut through the fog, I saw shapes moving in the water. Big shapes, moving too fast to be boats. Thor started growling, not at me, not at anything I could see. He was staring at the water, his hackles raised, his whole body tense. I'd never seen him look so scared. I tried calling the ranger station on the mainland, but the radio wasn't working right. All I got was that screaming static. I was stuck out there with a storm coming and no way to call for help. That night, lying in my small room above the lighthouse office, I couldn't sleep. The wind kept getting stronger and I could hear things hitting the building. Not just leaves and branches, other things. Things that sounded heavier. I kept thinking about the old stories my grandmother used to tell me. She was part Ojibwe, and she always said Lake Superior had things living in it that were older than humans. Things that came up from the deep water when they were hungry. I used to think those were just stories to scare children. Now I wasn't so sure. The next morning, I woke up feeling like something was watching me. You know that feeling when someone's staring at you from behind? That's what it was like, except there was nobody there. I made my coffee extra strong and went outside to check the shoreline. That's when I found the first sign that something was really wrong. There were pieces of life jackets scattered all over the beach, bright orange chunks of foam and fabric. But these weren't torn by rocks or water. They had holes in them, big round holes like something had punched through them or bitten through them. Thor wouldn't go near the pieces. Every time I tried to get him to come with me to the beach, he would back away and whine. This was strange because Thor loved the water. He'd swim in Lake Superior even when it was freezing cold. I picked up one of the bigger pieces and examined it. The edges of the holes were smooth, not jagged like you'd expect from rocks or metal. And there was a smell on them, a fishy smell but wrong somehow, like fish that had been dead too long. That afternoon, a photographer showed up. His name was Danny Kowalski, and he was doing a story about the lighthouses on the Great Lakes. Nice. Guy, maybe 30 years old, with curly brown hair and friendly eyes. He had all kinds of fancy camera equipment. "This place is incredible," he said, setting up his tripod near the cliffs. "The way the light hits these rocks is amazing." I was glad to have company, even if it was just for a few days. It had been lonely out there, especially with all the weird things happening. Danny started taking pictures right away. He was excited about catching the sunset over the lake. While he worked, I told him about the life jacket pieces. "Probably just fell off a boat during the storm," he said, not looking up from his camera. "Happens all the time on these big lakes. But I knew boats. I'd spent years rescuing people from them. Life jackets don't get holes like that from normal accidents." That evening, while Danny was taking sunset photos, I noticed something else strange. There was a cave entrance that I'd never seen before. It was down near the waterline, where the waves had washed away some rocks during the last storm. Cold air was coming out of that cave. Not just cool air, cold air. So cold I could see it like breath on a winter day. And there was a sound coming from inside. A clicking sound, like someone tapping their fingernails on a table, but deeper. I got my flashlight and climbed down to take a look. The cave went back farther than my light could reach. The walls were wet and slimy, covered with some kind of algae that glowed a little bit in the dark. Thor refused to come with me. He stayed up on the rocks, barking and whimpering. I'd never seen him act like this before. As I got closer to the cave entrance, I started feeling dizzy. like when you stand up too fast and the blood rushes to your head. The clicking sound got louder, and I realized it was coming from deep inside the cave. Really deep? I backed away and climbed back up to where Danny was taking pictures. "Find anything interesting?" he asked. "Just an old cave," I said, but I didn't tell him about the cold air or the clicking sounds. I didn't want him to think I was crazy. That night I couldn't sleep again. The sounds from outside were getting worse, not just wind and waves, but other things. Scraping sounds against the lighthouse walls, splashing sounds from the water that were too big to be fish. Around midnight, I heard the radio crackle to life. It shouldn't have been getting any signals. I hadn't turned it on. But there it was, clear as day, a distress call. "Mayday, Mayday. This is the fishing vessel Northern Star. We're taking on water. Need immediate assistance." I grabbed the microphone. "Northern Star, this is Pictured Rock's lighthouse. What's your position?" But there was no answer, just static. Then the radio went dead. The thing that scared me was this. I knew that boat. The Northern Star had sunk 3 weeks ago. I'd read about it in the maritime reports. All hands lost. So, who was calling for help? The next day started quiet. Too quiet. Even the waves seemed to be whispering instead of crashing against the rocks like they usually did. Danny was excited to explore more of the area, but I had a bad feeling about it. "I want to get some photos of those tide pools you mentioned," he said over breakfast. "The light should be perfect this morning." I didn't want him going down there alone, so I went with him. Thor came too, but he stayed far back from the water. Smart dog. When we got to the tide pools, Danny immediately started setting up his camera. That's when we saw them, the bones. They were scattered around one of the bigger pools, white and clean like they'd been picked clean by fish. But they were ground down to powder in some places, like someone had poured acid on them. "What kind of animal does this?" Danny asked, taking pictures. I didn't know. In all my years doing search and rescue, I'd never seen bones damaged like this. The shapes that were left looked human, but I didn't want to think about that. Danny was looking through his camera when he stopped. "That's weird," he said. "What?" He showed me the camera's display screen. In the photo, there were dark shapes moving under the water that we couldn't see with our naked eyes. Long, thin shapes that looked almost like shadows, but shadows don't move by themselves. "Probably just the light playing tricks," Danny said, but his voice sounded uncertain. We headed back to the lighthouse, but I kept looking over my shoulder. I felt like we were being watched. Thor must have felt it too because he kept stopping and looking back at the lake. That afternoon, while Danny was inside organizing his photos, I decided to check the weather radio. The storm was supposed to pass by evening, but I wanted to make sure. As I was adjusting the antenna, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Sonar pings, deep, rhythmic clicking sounds coming from the lake. But there were no boats out there, no submarines, nothing that should be making those sounds. The pings were answered by other pings from different areas of the lake, like they were talking to each other. I ran to get Danny. "You need to hear this," I said. But by the time we got back to the radio, the sounds had stopped. Just normal static and weather reports. Maybe it was the Coast Guard running exercises, Danny suggested. I knew it wasn't. I'd heard Coast Guard sonar before. This was different, deeper, more intelligent. As the sun started to set, Danny wanted to take more photos from the cliff top. I told him to be careful and stay back from the edge. Those rocks could be slippery. I was in the lighthouse office doing paperwork when I heard Danny shout. Not a scared shout, an excited one. "Rebecca, come quick! You have to see this!" I ran. Outside, Danny was pointing at the water with one hand and holding his camera with the other. "There," he said, "in the water. Do you see them?" At first I didn't see anything. Then the water moved in a way that wasn't natural. Ripples appeared in a circle, like something big had just gone under the surface. Then another circle. Then another. "They're swimming in formation," Danny whispered. He was taking picture after picture, like dolphins, but bigger. The circles got closer to shore. That's when I saw the first head break the surface. It looked human from a distance, but as it got closer, I could see it wasn't human at all. The head was too long, too narrow, and the skin looked wet and grey, like a seal's but smoother. "Danny," I said quietly, "step back from the edge," but he was too focused on his camera. "This is incredible," he said. "What are they?" More heads appeared. 5, then 10, then more than I could count. They were swimming toward the shore in a perfect line, moving fast, too fast. That's when Thor started barking, not his normal bark, a desperate warning bark. He ran to Danny and grabbed his jacket with his teeth, trying to pull him away from the cliff. "It's okay, boy," Danny said, gently pushing Thor away. "They're just animals, but I knew better. Animals don't swim in perfect formation. Animals don't coordinate their movements like military units." One of the creatures got close enough to shore that I could see it clearly. It had webbed hands that ended in long, sharp fingers, gills on the sides of its neck that opened and closed, and eyes, large, dark eyes that looked too intelligent for any fish or seal. It was looking right at us. "Danny," I said more urgently, "we need to go, now." That's when the creature opened its mouth, rows and rows of needle-sharp teeth. It made a sound, a clicking, hissing sound that made my ears hurt. The other creatures answered with the same sound. Then they all started swimming. Toward the rocks below us, Danny finally lowered his camera. "Maybe we should head inside," he said, his voice shaky, but it was too late. We heard a splashing sound, then a scraping sound. Something was climbing up the cliff face. I grabbed Danny's arm and Thor's collar. "Run," I said. We ran back to the lighthouse just as the first creature pulled itself over the edge of the cliff. In the growing darkness, all I could see was its silhouette, but it was standing upright, walking on 2 legs, walking like a person, but moving too fast to be human. We made it inside and I slammed the door, turning every lock I had. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the deadbolt to slide into place. "What were those things?" Danny asked. I looked out the window. More shapes were climbing over the cliff edge. A lot more. "I don't know," I said, "but they're not friendly." We stood there in the dark lighthouse office, listening. Outside, we could hear wet footsteps on the wooden deck that went around the building. Slow, careful steps, like they were learning how to walk on land. Thor was pressed against my legs, trembling. This big, brave dog, who had helped rescue people from burning buildings, was scared out of his mind. "Turn off the lights," I whispered to Danny. He hit the switch and we crept to the window. In the moonlight, I could see them clearly for the first time. They looked like people, but wrong. Their skin was grey and wet, like they'd just climbed out of deep water. They had long arms and fingers with webbing between them. Their heads were shaped like humans, but stretched out. And those eyes, big, dark eyes that reflected light like a cat's. "How many are there?" Danny whispered. I counted at least 8, walking around our building, but I could hear splashing from the water below. More were coming. One of them pressed its face against our window. This close, I could see the gills on its neck moving as it breathed. Its mouth was slightly open, showing those needle teeth. It tilted its head, studying us like we were fish in a tank. Then it did something that made my stomach turn. It smiled, not a friendly smile, a hungry smile. It tapped on the glass with one long finger. Tap, tap, tap. The other creatures gathered around our window, all of them staring at us with those dark eyes. "The radio," I said. "I need to call for help." I crawled across the floor to the radio desk. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely turn the dials. Finally, I got a signal. "Mayday, mayday. This is Pictured Rock's lighthouse. We have an emergency situation. Please respond." Static. Then a voice. "Pictured Rocks. This is Coast Guard. Station Grand Marais. What's your emergency?" "We're under attack," I said. "Unknown to creatures. They came from the lake. We need immediate assistance." Long pause. "Pictured Rocks. Can you repeat? Did you say creatures?" Before I could answer, there was a loud crash. One of the windows in the back room had broken. We could hear glass falling to the floor. "They're inside," Danny said. I grabbed my emergency flare gun from the desk drawer. "Stay behind me." We moved toward the stairs that led up to the lighthouse. Lamp room. If we could get up there, we'd have a better chance. The stairs were narrow. They couldn't all come up at once. As we reached the stairs, I saw the first creature coming around the corner. In the indoor light, it looked even worse. Its skin was covered with scales that glistened with water. When it saw us, it opened its mouth and made that awful clicking sound. I fired the flare. The bright red light hit it in the chest, and it stumbled backward, making a sound like a scream mixed with the hiss of steam. The smell of burning filled the air. "They don't like the bright light," I said. "Come on!" We ran up the stairs. Thor was ahead of us, barking. Behind us I could hear more glass breaking as more creatures forced their way into the building. We made it to the lamp room. This was the heart of the lighthouse, a big round room with windows all around and the massive light in the center. I turned it on and the beam started rotating, sending bright white light across the lake and cliffs. "Will this keep them away?" Danny asked. I hope so, but I was wrong. Through the windows I could see them climbing up the outside of the lighthouse. They moved like spiders, using their webbed hands and feet to grip the metal and stone. One appeared at the window right next to Danny. It pressed its face against the glass, leaving wet marks. Then it started hitting the window with its fist. The glass was thick, but I could see cracks starting to form. "Danny, get away from there." More creatures appeared at other windows. They were surrounding us. The light didn't seem to bother them as much up here. Maybe they were getting used to it. One of the windows broke. A webbed hand reached through, feeling around for the latch. I shot another flare, this time right at the hand. The creature pulled back with that steam hiss sound, but its hand was already healing. The burned skin was growing back. "My God," Danny said, "they heal themselves." That's when I understood how much trouble we were in. These things could heal from injuries. They were stronger than humans, and there were a lot more of them than us. The radio crackled to life. "Pictured rocks. This is Coast Guard Rescue Boat Delta 7. We're 20 minutes out. Can you signal your position?" 20 minutes. We had to survive 20 minutes. "I'm signaling with the lighthouse beam," I said into the radio. But as I spoke, the lights flickered. The creatures had found the power cables. "They're too smart," I said to Danny. "They're cutting our power." Outside, more creatures were climbing up from the lake. I could see dozens of them now, maybe more. They moved with purpose, like they had a plan. One of them had something in its hand. It looked like a piece of metal from a ship, sharp and curved. It was using it to cut through the window frame. "Rebecca," Danny said quietly. "Look at this." He was holding his camera, showing me the display screen. He'd been taking pictures during the attack, and now he was looking through them. In the photos, I could see the creatures more clearly than with my eyes. They weren't just random monsters. They were wearing things around their necks, carved pieces of bone or shell. And some of them had tools, crude knives made from metal and stone. "They have a society," Danny whispered. "They make things. They plan." The power went out. The lighthouse beam died, leaving us in darkness except for the moonlight through the windows. In that darkness we heard them, all around us, scratching, climbing, getting ready to break in. And from the water below, I heard more of that clicking. More of them were coming. A lot more. "The Coast Guard will never believe this," I said. "If we survive," Danny said, "we'll make them believe." But first, we had to survive the next 20 minutes. And I was starting to think that might be impossible. Without the lighthouse beam, the creatures got bolder. They weren't afraid of the small flashlights we had. I could hear them on the roof. Now trying to find a way in from above. "The emergency generator," I said suddenly. "There's a backup generator in the basement." "How do we get there?" Danny asked. "They're everywhere." I thought for a moment. The lighthouse had a service ladder that went from the lamp room straight down to the basement. We'd have to go past all the floors where the creatures were, but it was our only chance. "Follow me, and stay quiet." I opened the small door that led to the service ladder. It was pitch black in there. We started climbing down, one rung at a time. Thor whimpering softly above us. He was too big to fit on the ladder. On the second floor, I could hear them moving around, searching for us. Their wet feet made squelching sounds on the floor. One of them was right on the other side of the wall. From where we were climbing, we made it to the basement. The generator was there, just like I remembered, but when I tried to start it, nothing happened. The fuel line had been cut. They'd found it before we did. "Now what?" Danny whispered. I looked around the basement with my flashlight. There were old emergency supplies down here. Flares, batteries, and something else. Containers of diesel fuel for the generator. "I have an idea," I said. "But you're not going to like it." I told Danny my plan. We could pour the diesel fuel around the bottom of the lighthouse and set it on fire. The flames would drive the creatures back into the water, but we'd have to get out before the whole building caught fire. "That's crazy," Danny said. "You have a better idea?" We could hear the creatures moving around upstairs. Some of them had figured out how to open doors. It wouldn't be long before they found the basement. We grabbed as many fuel containers as we could carry and crept back up the stairs. The first floor was full of them. I counted at least 6 creatures searching through the rooms. "On my signal," I whispered to Danny, "run for the door and start pouring fuel outside. I'll create a distraction." I fired a flare into the group of creatures. They screamed and scattered, that steam hiss sound filling the air. In the chaos, Danny ran for the front door. I was right behind him, but one of the creatures grabbed my arm. Its grip was incredibly strong, and I could feel its claws digging into my skin. It pulled me toward its mouth, those needle teeth getting closer to my face. That's when Thor came thundering down the stairs. He hit the creature like a missile, knocking it away from me. The brave dog stood between me and the other creatures, barking and snapping at them. "Thor, come on!" I yelled, but he wouldn't leave. He was buying me time to escape, and we both knew it. I ran outside, where Danny was already pouring diesel fuel around the building. The creatures outside had backed away when they saw the fire from my flare, but they were regrouping. "We need to hurry," Danny said. I could hear Thor fighting inside the lighthouse. His barks were getting weaker. I wanted to go back for him, but I knew it was too late. We finished spreading the fuel just as the first creatures started coming toward us again. I lit a flare and threw it onto the diesel fuel. The fire caught immediately, creating a ring of flames around the lighthouse. The creatures screamed and jumped back. Some of them were too close and caught fire themselves. They ran toward the lake, their wet skin sizzling, but the fire was spreading faster than I expected. The old wooden parts of the lighthouse caught fire quickly. "We need to get away from here," Danny said. That's when we heard the sound of boat engines. The coast guard was coming. I could see their lights cutting through the darkness on the lake. The creatures heard it too. They started retreating toward the water, but they weren't running in panic. They were moving in that same organized way, like soldiers following a plan. As the Coast Guard boats got closer, I saw something that made my blood freeze. The creatures weren't swimming away. They were swimming toward the boats. "No," I said. I grabbed the radio from my belt. "Coast Guard boats, this is Rebecca Foster. Do not approach the shore. Repeat, do not approach. You're in danger." "Rebecca, this is Lieutenant Johnson. We can see the fire. Are you injured?" "Listen to me carefully," I said. "There are things in the water, hostile creatures. They're swimming toward you right now. Rebecca, you may be suffering from smoke inhalation. We're coming to get you." I watched in horror as the creatures surrounded the lead boat. In the spotlight, I could see them climbing up the sides. Then the shooting started. The Coast Guard men were good soldiers. They fought back, but their bullets didn't seem to stop the creatures for long. I saw flashes of gunfire, heard shouts and screams. The fire behind us was getting bigger. Parts of the lighthouse were starting to collapse. We had to move away from the building. "This way," I said, leading Danny toward the tree line. From the forest, we watched the battle on the lake. It lasted maybe 10 minutes. When it was over, 2 of the 3 Coast Guard boats were sinking. The 3rd boat was racing back toward the mainland. The creatures disappeared under the water like they'd never been there. Danny and I spent the rest of the night in the forest, watching the lighthouse burn. When morning came, more boats arrived. Real rescue boats this time, with helicopters and armed escorts. They pulled us off that cliff and took us to the hospital. Danny had some cuts and bruises. I had 2nd and 3rd degree burns on my arms from getting too close to the fire. The official report said there had been a gas leak that caused an explosion. They said I was confused from smoke inhalation when I reported the attacks. Danny's. Photos were dismissed as unclear images of debris in the water, but I know what I saw. And I know those things are still out there, somewhere deep in Lake Superior. I transferred to a ranger station in Arizona a month later. I can't stand the sound of water anymore. Can't even take a bath without thinking about those dark eyes and needle teeth. Danny published his photos in a magazine, but nobody believed they were real. He became obsessed with finding the creatures again. Last I heard, he was still taking pictures around the Great Lakes, looking for them. I never found out what happened to Thor's body. I like to think he gave them such a fight that they decided he wasn't worth eating. Sometimes late at night, I still hear that clicking sound in my dreams. And I wake up knowing they're still out there, waiting for the next person who gets too close to their home, in the deep, dark water. If you ever find yourself alone near Lake Superior on a foggy night, and you hear that clicking sound, don't investigate. Don't try to take pictures, just run. Run as fast as you can, and don't look back, because some things are better left in the dark water where they belong. My name is Lisa Washington, and I'm a park ranger on Assateague Island, Maryland. You've probably never heard of this place, but it's one of the most beautiful spots on the whole East Coast. Wild ponies run free here, their hooves splashing through. Shallow salt water as they graze on the tough grass that grows near the beach. The Atlantic Ocean stretches out forever, and on good days, you can watch ospreys dive into the waves to catch fish. I used to be a marine biologist before I became a ranger. That was before the oil spill in Alaska changed everything for me. I was there when the Exxon Valdez crashed and spilled millions of gallons of crude oil into the water. I spent weeks trying to clean oil off seabirds, watching them die in my hands despite everything I did. After that, I couldn't go back to my old life. I needed to be somewhere I could actually protect wildlife, not just study it. Assateague Island became my home 3 years ago. It's a barrier island, which means it's like a long, thin wall of sand that protects the mainland from big storms. The island is only about 37 miles long, but it's packed with life. Sea turtles come here to lay their eggs in the summer. Hundreds of bird species stop here during migration. And those famous wild ponies? They've been here for over 300 years, but something was wrong that summer of 1991. Dead wrong. It started in late July. I was doing my morning walk along the beach, checking on the sea turtle nests. That's when I saw my first dead fish. Not just 1 or 2, dozens of them washed up on the shore. Their bodies looked normal from the outside. But when I cut one open to check what killed it, its insides were like jelly. Everything was liquefied, as if something had dissolved its organs from the inside. The next day, there were hundreds of dead fish. The day after that, thousands. I called the state environmental office and sent samples to the lab. While I waited for results, I started noticing other strange things. The water in the bay had patches that looked different, darker somehow, like someone had spilled ink in the water. When I tested the temperature, those dark patches were 15 degrees warmer than the rest of the bay. The wild ponies started, acting weird too. These horses have lived on this island for centuries. They know every inch of sand, every tide pool, every good patch of grass. But suddenly, they were abandoning the coastal areas where they usually fed. I'd see whole herds galloping inland, their ears pinned back like they were running from something. Even the birds were spooked. Pelicans that had been fishing in the same spots for years suddenly stopped coming. I watched one group dive into the water like they always did, then shoot back up immediately and fly away fast, like something had scared them underwater. But the worst part was the turtle nests. I've been monitoring sea turtle nests for 3 years. Loggerhead turtles come to Assateague every summer to lay their eggs in the sand. The mothers dig holes, lay up to 120 eggs, cover them carefully, and then return to the ocean. Those eggs incubate for about 2 months before the baby turtles hatch and race to the water. I had 43 active nests that summer. By the first week of August, 27 of them had been abandoned. Not by predators, the eggs were still there, intact. But when I dug them up to check, they were cold. The mothers had just left. These turtles have been coming to this beach for thousands of years. They don't just abandon their babies. I couldn't sleep. Every night I'd lie in my small cabin near the research station and listen to the waves. But the sound was different now, angrier. The ocean seemed to be hitting the shore harder than usual, even when there was no storm coming. The weather report said a tropical storm was building off the coast, but it wasn't supposed to hit us for another week. Still, I could feel something in the air. The usual summer breeze felt thick and electric, like the moment before lightning strikes. I started having dreams about Alaska again, about birds covered in black oil, their eyes full of fear and pain as I tried desperately to clean them. But in the dreams, the oil wasn't black. It was dark green, and it moved like it was alive. One morning I woke up to find the beach grass near the water's edge had died overnight. Not gradually, like from drought or disease. These were perfect, geometric patterns of dead grass, circles and lines that looked almost like someone had drawn them in the sand. I took photos and sent them to every marine biologist I knew. Most didn't reply. The ones who did said I was probably seeing the effects of a chemical spill or maybe some kind of algae bloom. They told me to keep taking water samples and stay calm, but I wasn't calm. Something was very wrong here, and it was getting worse every day. The morning Mike Chen arrived, I found something that made my blood run cold. I was checking the tide pools like I did every day, looking for signs of what was killing the fish. The pools were bubbling, actually bubbling, with some kind of phosphorescent algae I'd never seen before. It glowed faint blue-green in the early morning light. When I dipped my hand in the water to collect a sample, the algae moved away from my fingers like it was alive, not just floating away, but actively avoiding me. I'd studied marine biology for 8 years, and I'd never seen anything like it. That's when I heard the truck coming down the beach road. A graduate student from the University of Maryland was coming to study water temperature changes around the island. He'd requested help weeks ago when the first signs of trouble started. His name was Mike Chen, and according to his advisor, he was one of the brightest students they'd ever had. I needed help, because whatever was happening to Assateague Island, it was bigger than dead fish and spooked ponies. It was bigger than anything I could handle alone. Mike Chen stepped out of his beat-up Honda Civic and immediately started coughing. The smell hit him first, that rotten egg stench that comes from things dying in water. He was about my age, maybe a few years younger, with thick glasses and a nervous way of moving his hands when he talked. "You must be Lisa," he said, walking over with a heavy backpack and several cases of equipment. "I'm Mike. Thanks for requesting help with the temperature readings. Though I have to say, the smell here is intense." I helped him carry his gear to the research station. "It's gotten worse in the past week," I told him. "Wait until you see the water samples." Mike was here to study why the bay water temperatures were changing so dramatically. His specialty was ocean thermal dynamics, basically how and why water heats up or cools down in different areas. What he found in our bay shouldn't have been possible. "These readings can't be right," he said after his first day of testing. We were sitting in the research station, looking at his computer screen. "Look at this. The surface temperature here is 78 degrees, perfectly normal for August. But 30 feet down, it's 95 degrees. That's not how water works. I leaned closer. To the screen. What do you mean? Cold water sinks, warm water rises. It's basic physics. The deeper you go, the colder it should get. This is backwards. He adjusted his glasses and pulled up another chart. And look at this pattern. The temperature. Map looked like a target. The hottest water was in the center of the bay, and it got cooler as you moved outward in perfect circles, like something was heating the water from below. Maybe it's an underwater hot spring, I suggested. Mike shook his head. Hot springs don't appear overnight, and they don't create perfect circles like this. Plus, I tested the water chemistry. This isn't mineral water from deep underground. It's regular bay water, just heated. He showed me his microscope slides. Under the lens, the water from the hot zones was full of tiny organisms I'd never seen before. They looked like microscopic jellyfish, but they moved too fast and in patterns that seemed almost organized. Are they bacteria? I asked. I don't think so. They're too complex, but they're not in any of my identification books. I've sent samples to 3 different labs, but it'll be days before we get results. While Mike worked on his water studies, I continued my daily rounds. The situation was getting worse. More dead fish washed up each morning. The wild ponies had moved even further inland. I hadn't seen one near the beach in 4 days, but the worst discovery came when I checked my equipment. I had underwater microphones set up around the bay to monitor dolphin activity. When I played back the recordings from the past week, I heard something that made my skin crawl. It started as normal ocean sounds. Waves, the distant rumble of boat engines, some fish activity. But underneath all that was something else. A low humming sound, almost like whale song, but different. It had a rhythm to it, like machinery, or like breathing. I played the recording for Mike. He listened with his eyes closed, then asked me to play it again. That's not biological, he said finally. Whale songs don't have that metallic quality, and it's too regular, too mechanical. But it can't be a machine either, I said. There's nothing out there. The Coast Guard would know if there was a submarine or something in the bay. Mike pulled up his sonar readings on the computer. Actually, about that, he pointed to a dark mass on the screen. I've been tracking this for 3 days. It's big, maybe 300 feet long, but every time I try to get a clear reading, the signal gets scrambled. I stared at the screen. What do you think it is? As I was adjusting the antenna, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Sonar pings, deep, rhythmic clicking sounds coming from the lake. But there were no boats out there, no submarines. Nothing that should be making those sounds. The pings were answered by other pings from different areas of the lake, like they were talking to each other. I ran to get Danny. You need to hear this, I said. But by the time we got back to the radio, the sounds had stopped. Just normal static and weather reports. Maybe it was the Coast Guard running exercises, Danny suggested. I knew it wasn't. I'd heard Coast Guard sonar before. This was different. Deeper, more intelligent. As the sun started to set, Danny wanted to take more photos from the cliff top. I told him to be careful and stay back from the edge. Those rocks could be slippery. I was in the lighthouse office doing paperwork when I heard Danny shout. Not a scared shout, an excited one. Rebecca, come quick, you have to see this. I ran. Outside, Danny was pointing at the water with one hand and holding his camera with the other. There, he said, in the water. Do you see them? At first, I didn't see anything. Then the water moved in a way that wasn't natural. Ripples appeared in a circle, like something big had just gone under the surface. Then another circle. Then another. They're swimming in formation, Danny whispered. He was taking picture after picture, like dolphins, but bigger. The circles got closer to shore. That's when I saw the first head break the surface. It looked human from a distance, but as it got closer, I could see it wasn't human at all. The head was too long, too narrow, and the skin looked wet and grey, like a seal's but smoother. "Danny," I said quietly, "step back from the edge," but he was too focused on his camera. "This is incredible," he said. "What are they?" More heads appeared. 5, then 10, then more than I could count. They were swimming toward the shore in a perfect line, moving fast, too fast. That's when Thor started barking, not his normal bark, a desperate warning bark. He ran to Danny and grabbed his jacket with his teeth, trying to pull him away from the cliff. "It's okay, boy," Danny said, gently pushing Thor away. "They're just animals," but I knew better. Animals don't swim in perfect formation. Animals don't coordinate their movements like military units. One of the creatures got close enough to shore that I could see it clearly. It had webbed hands that ended in long, sharp fingers, gills on the sides of its neck that opened and closed, and eyes, large, dark eyes that looked too intelligent for any fish or seal. It was looking right at us. "Danny," I said more urgently, "we need to go, now." That's when the creature opened its mouth, rows and rows of needle-sharp teeth. It made a sound, a clicking, hissing sound that made my ears hurt. The other creatures answered with the same sound. Then they all started swimming. Toward the rocks below us, Danny finally lowered his camera. "Maybe we should head inside," he said, his voice shaky, but it was too late. We heard a splashing sound, then a scraping sound. Something was climbing up the cliff face. I grabbed Danny's arm and Thor's collar. "Run," I said. We ran back to the lighthouse just as the first creature pulled itself over the edge of the cliff. In the growing darkness, all I could see was its silhouette, but it was standing upright, walking on 2 legs, walking like a person, but moving too fast to be human. We made it inside and I slammed the door, turning every lock I had. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the deadbolt to slide into place. "What were those things?" Danny asked. I looked out the window. More shapes were climbing over the cliff edge. A lot more. "I don't know," I said, "but they're not friendly." We stood there in the dark lighthouse office, listening. Outside, we could hear wet footsteps on the wooden deck that went around the building. Slow, careful steps, like they were learning how to walk on land. Thor was pressed against my legs, trembling. This big, brave dog, who had helped rescue people from burning buildings, was scared out of his mind. "Turn off the lights," I whispered to Danny. He hit the switch and we crept to the window. In the moonlight I could see them clearly for the first time. They looked like people, but wrong. Their skin was grey and wet, like they'd just climbed out of deep water. They had long arms and fingers with webbing between them. Their heads were shaped like humans, but stretched out. And those eyes, big, dark eyes that reflected light like a cat's. "How many are there?" Danny whispered. I counted at least 8, walking around our building, but I could hear splashing from the water below. More were coming. One of them pressed its face against our window. This close, I could see the gills on its neck moving as it breathed. Its mouth was slightly open, showing those needle teeth. It tilted its head, studying us like we were fish in a tank. Then it did something that made my stomach turn. It smiled, not a friendly smile, a hungry smile. It tapped on the glass with one long finger. Tap, tap, tap. The other creatures gathered around our window, all of them staring at us with those dark eyes. "The radio," I said. "I need to call for help." I crawled across the floor to the radio desk. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely turn the dials. Finally, I got a signal. "Mayday, mayday. This is Pictured Rock's lighthouse. We have an emergency situation. Please respond." Static. Then a voice. "Pictured Rocks. This is Coast Guard. Station Grand Marais. What's your emergency?" "We're under attack," I said. "Unknown creatures. They came from the lake. We need immediate assistance." Long pause. "Pictured Rocks. Can you repeat? Did you say creatures?" Before I could answer, there was a loud crash. One of the windows in the back room had broken. We could hear glass falling to the floor. "They're inside," Danny said. I grabbed my emergency flare gun from the desk drawer. "Stay behind me," We moved toward the stairs that led up to the lighthouse. Lamp room. If we could get up there, we'd have a better chance. The stairs were narrow. They couldn't all come up at once. As we reached the stairs, I saw the first creature coming around the corner. In the indoor light, it looked even worse. Its skin was covered with scales that glistened with water. When it saw us, it opened its mouth and made that awful clicking sound. I fired the flare. The bright red light hit it in the chest, and it stumbled backward, making a sound like a scream mixed with the hiss of steam. The smell of burning filled the air. "They don't like the bright light," I said. "Come on!" We ran up the stairs. Thor was ahead of us, barking. Behind us I could hear more glass breaking as more creatures forced their way into the building. We made it to the lamp room. This was the heart of the lighthouse, a big round room with windows all around and the massive light in the center. I turned it on, and the beams started rotating, sending bright white light across the lake and cliffs. "Will this keep them away?" Danny asked. I hope so, but I was wrong. Through the windows, I could see them climbing up the outside of the lighthouse. They moved like spiders, using their webbed hands and feet to grip the metal and stone. One appeared at the window right next to Danny. It pressed its face against the glass, leaving wet marks. Then it started hitting the window with its fist. The glass was thick, but I could see cracks starting to form. "Danny, get away from there." More creatures appeared at other windows. They were surrounding us. The light didn't seem to bother them as much up here. Maybe they were getting used to it. One of the windows broke. A webbed hand reached through, feeling around for the latch. I shot another flare, this time right at the hand. The creature pulled back with that steam hiss sound, but its hand was already healing. The burned skin was growing back. "My God," Danny said, "they heal themselves." That's when I understood how much trouble we were in. These things could heal from injuries. They were stronger than humans, and there were a lot more of them than us. The radio crackled to life. "Pictured rocks. This is Coast Guard Rescue Boat Delta 7. We're 20 minutes out. Can you signal your position?" 20 minutes. We had to survive 20 minutes. "I'm signaling with the lighthouse beam," I said into the radio. But as I spoke, the lights flickered. The creatures had found the power cables. "They're too smart," I said to Danny. "They're cutting our power." Outside, more creatures were climbing up from the lake. I could see dozens of them now, maybe more. They moved with purpose, like they had a plan. One of them had something in its hand. It looked like a piece of metal from a ship, sharp and curved. It was using it to cut through the window frame. "Rebecca," Danny said quietly. "Look at this." He was holding his camera, showing me the display screen. He'd been taking pictures during the attack, and now he was looking through them. In the photos, I could see the creatures more clearly than with my eyes. They weren't just random monsters. They were wearing things around their necks, carved pieces of bone or shell. And some of them had tools, crude knives made from metal and stone. "They have a society," Danny whispered. "They make things. They plan." The power went out. The lighthouse beam died, leaving us in darkness except for the moonlight through the windows. In that darkness we heard them, all around us, scratching, climbing, getting ready to break in. And from the water below, I heard more of that clicking. More of them were coming. A lot more. "The Coast Guard will never believe this," I said. "If we survive," Danny said, "we'll make them believe." But first, we had to survive the next 20 minutes. And I was starting to think that might be impossible. Without the lighthouse beam, the creatures got bolder. They weren't afraid of the small flashlights we had. I could hear them on the roof, now trying to find a way in from above. "The emergency generator," I said suddenly. "There's a backup generator in the basement." "How do we get there?" Danny asked. "They're everywhere." I thought for a moment. The lighthouse had a service ladder that went from the lamp room straight down to the basement. We'd have to go past all the floors where the creatures were, but it was our only chance. "Follow me, and stay quiet." I opened the small door that led to the service ladder. It was pitch black in there. We started climbing down, one rung at a time. Thor whimpering softly above us. He was too big to fit on the ladder. On the second floor, I could hear them moving around, searching for us. Their wet feet made squelching sounds on the floor. One of them was right on the other side of the wall. From where we were climbing, we made it to the basement. The generator was there, just like I remembered, but when I tried to start it, nothing happened. The fuel line had been cut. They'd found it before we did. "Now what?" Danny whispered. I looked around the basement with my flashlight. There were old emergency supplies down here. Flares, batteries, and something else. Containers of diesel fuel for the generator. "I have an idea," I said. "But you're not going to like it." I told Danny my plan. We could pour the diesel fuel around the bottom of the lighthouse and set it on fire. The flames would drive the creatures back into the water, but we'd have to get out before the whole building caught fire. "That's crazy," Danny said. "You have a better idea?" We could hear the creatures moving around upstairs. Some of them had figured out how to open doors. It wouldn't be long before they found the basement. We grabbed as many fuel containers as we could carry and crept back up the stairs. The first floor was full of them. I counted at least 6 creatures searching through the rooms. "On my signal," I whispered to Danny, "run for the door and start pouring fuel outside. I'll create a distraction." I fired a flare into the group of creatures. They screamed and scattered, that steam hiss sound filling the air. In the chaos, Danny ran for the front door. I was right behind him, but one of the creatures grabbed my arm. Its grip was incredibly strong, and I could feel its claws digging into my skin. It pulled me toward its mouth, those needle teeth getting closer to my face. That's when Thor came thundering down the stairs. He hit the creature like a missile, knocking it away from me. The brave dog stood between me and the other creatures, barking and snapping at them. "Thor, come on!" I yelled, but he wouldn't leave. He was buying me time to escape, and we both knew it. I ran outside where Danny was already pouring diesel fuel around the building. The creatures outside had backed away when they saw the fire from my flare, but they were regrouping. "We need to hurry," Danny said. I could hear Thor fighting inside the lighthouse. His barks were getting weaker. I wanted to go back for him, but I knew it was too late. We finished spreading the fuel just as the first creatures started coming toward us again. I lit a flare and threw it onto the diesel fuel. The fire caught immediately, creating a ring of flames around the lighthouse. The creatures screamed and jumped back. Some of them were too close and caught fire themselves. They ran toward the lake, their wet skins sizzling, but the fire was spreading faster than I expected. The old wooden parts of the lighthouse caught fire quickly. "We need to get away from here," Danny said. That's when we heard the sound of boat engines. The coast guard was coming. I could see their lights cutting through the darkness on the lake. The creatures heard it too. They started retreating toward the water, but they weren't running in panic. They were moving in that same organized way, like soldiers following a plan. As the Coast Guard boats got closer, I saw something that made my blood freeze. The creatures weren't swimming away. They were swimming toward the boats. "No," I said. I grabbed the radio from my belt. "Coast Guard boats, this is Rebecca Foster. Do not approach the shore. Repeat, do not approach. You're in danger." "Rebecca, this is Lieutenant Johnson. We can see the fire. Are you injured?" "Listen to me carefully," I said. "There are things in the water, hostile creatures. They're swimming toward you right now. Rebecca, you may be suffering from smoke inhalation. We're coming to get you." I watched in horror as the creatures surrounded the lead boat. In the spotlight, I could see them climbing up the sides. Then the shooting started. The Coast Guard men were good soldiers. They fought back, but their bullets didn't seem to stop the creatures for long. I saw flashes of gunfire, heard shouts and screams. The fire behind us was getting bigger. Parts of the lighthouse were starting to collapse. We had to move away from the building. "This way," I said, leading Danny toward the tree line. From the forest, we watched the battle on the lake. It lasted maybe 10 minutes. When it was over, 2 of the 3 Coast Guard boats were sinking. The third boat was racing back toward the mainland. The creatures disappeared under the water like they'd never been there. Danny and I spent the rest of the night in the forest, watching the lighthouse burn. When morning came, more boats arrived. Real rescue boats this time, with helicopters and armed escorts. They pulled us off that cliff and took us to the hospital. Danny had some cuts and bruises. I had second and third degree burns on my arms from getting too close to the fire. The official report said there had been a gas leak that caused an explosion. They said I was confused from smoke inhalation when I reported the attacks. Danny's. Photos were dismissed as unclear images of debris in the water, but I know what I saw. And I know those things are still out there, somewhere deep in Lake Superior. I transferred to a ranger station in Arizona a month later. I can't stand the sound of water anymore. Can't even take a bath without thinking about those dark eyes and needle teeth. Danny published his photos in a magazine, but nobody believed they were real. He became obsessed with finding the creatures again. Last I heard, he was still taking pictures around the Great Lakes, looking for them. I never found out what happened to Thor's body. I like to think he gave them such a fight that they decided he wasn't worth eating. Sometimes late at night, I still hear that clicking sound in my dreams. And I wake up knowing they're still out there, waiting for the next person who gets too close to their home, in the deep, dark water. If you ever find yourself alone near Lake Superior on a foggy night, and you hear that clicking sound, don't investigate. Don't try to take pictures, just run. Run as fast as you can, and don't look back, because some things are better left in the dark water where they belong. Images flooded my mind again. This time, I saw the truth about what was happening. The creature had been the protector of these waters for over 1,000 years. It controlled the temperature, the currents, the balance of life. Every fish, every plant, every microscopic organism depended on it. But decades of pollution had slowly poisoned it. Oil spills, chemical runoff, plastic waste. All of it had accumulated in the creature's body. Like a sponge soaking up poison, it had absorbed everything harmful to protect the other marine life. Now, it was full of toxins, and its body was shutting down. Why is it showing us this? I asked, speaking to the empty lighthouse. Mike's voice came from everywhere at once. Because it has a choice to make. It can die here, in the bay, and release all those toxins back into the water. Everything for hundreds of miles would be poisoned. I saw the vision he was describing. Dead zones spreading across the ocean. Fish kills washing up on beaches from Virginia to New York. The entire Chesapeake Bay ecosystem collapsing. Or, I asked, though I was afraid of the answer, or it can take everything far out to sea, where the deep ocean can dilute the poison over time. But it needs help to get there. It's too weak to make the journey alone. The storm was getting worse. Water poured through the broken windows, and I could feel the lighthouse swaying in the wind. But the scariest part was that I could see Mike through the water, not his regular body, but a ghostly version of him, glowing like the creature's scales. Mike, what's happening to you? The creature needs someone to guide it, he said. Someone who understands the currents, the depths, the safest path to the deep ocean. It chose me because of my research. I understood then. Mike had been studying water temperatures and currents for years. His knowledge was exactly what the creature needed to navigate to the deep ocean trenches where it could die without poisoning everything around it. But that meant Mike would have to go with it. There has to be another way, I said desperately. The lighthouse shook again, and suddenly Mike was standing in front of me, but he was different now. His skin had a faint glow, and when he moved, he left trails of light in the air. Lisa, listen to me carefully, he said, his voice urgent. The creature has been trying to communicate with humans for decades. Scientists keep studying the bay, but no one understands what it's trying to say. He grabbed my hands. His touch was cold, but somehow comforting. It's been waiting for someone who would listen, someone who cares about the ocean as much as it does. That's why it called to us. Through Mike, the creature shared more of its story. It had been born in the deepest ocean trenches when the Earth was young. For millennia, it had traveled the world's waters, maintaining the delicate balance of marine life. But as humans became more numerous and their impact on the oceans grew, the creature had to work harder and harder to keep things alive. It started absorbing toxins to protect other sea life. It regulated temperatures to prevent fish kills. It generated electromagnetic fields to guide migrating animals away from dangerous areas. All this time, we thought it was causing the problems, I said. Understanding flooding through me, but it was trying to fix them. Mike nodded. The dead fish, the temperature changes, the electromagnetic readings, they were all signs that it was struggling to maintain the balance, like a doctor with a fever fighting an infection. The creature's third head appeared at the lighthouse window. This one was smaller than the others, and its eyes seemed sadder somehow. When it looked at me, I felt a wave of exhaustion that nearly knocked me down. "It's so tired," I whispered. Mike's form started to flicker like a candle in the wind. "The connection is getting stronger. I can feel myself becoming part of it. Lisa, I need you to do something. Anything. The research station has a backup generator and a long-range radio. You need to document everything, all our readings, the water samples, the temperature data. If something happens to us, the world needs to know the truth." I wanted to argue, to find a way to save both Mike and the creature, but I could see in his glowing eyes that he had already made his choice. "Promise me you'll tell the story," he said. "Not as a monster attacking ships, but as a guardian trying to save what it loves." The lighthouse lurched violently, and water began pouring up through the floorboards with more force. The creature was sinking back into the bay, taking Mike with it. "I promise," I shouted over the rushing water. Mike smiled one last time, and then he was gone. The water receded, leaving me alone in the lighthouse with broken glass and the sound of the storm continuing outside. I climbed down the lighthouse stairs on shaking legs and ran through the rain to the research station. Mike was right about the generator. It was still running despite the storm. I gathered every piece of data we had collected: temperature readings, electromagnetic measurements, water samples, photographs. Everything that proved the creature existed and what it was trying to do. But as I worked, I could feel the creature's presence in my mind. Weaker now, but still there. It was showing me something else. A final gift. Images of Mike appeared. In my thoughts, he was still alive, but changed. His human form was merging with something ancient and powerful. He wasn't dying. He was becoming part of something larger. "He's okay," I whispered to myself. Somehow, he's okay. The storm began to calm as the sun rose. Looking out from the research station, I could see the creature moving slowly toward the mouth of the bay. It was leaving, heading for the open ocean, with Mike guiding it. I watched until it disappeared beyond the horizon, taking with it 1,000 years of toxins and a brilliant young scientist who had chosen to save the world. Then I sat down at Mike's computer and began typing the report that would change my life forever, a report that no one would believe. Until now, I spent 3 days alone on the island, typing everything into Mike's computer. Every temperature reading, every electromagnetic measurement, every photograph we had taken. I wrote down exactly what we saw, what we heard, and what the creature had shown us. On the 4th morning, I heard helicopters approaching. The Coast Guard was coming back. I quickly copied all our files onto backup drives and hid them in different places around the island. Then I sat on the beach and waited for them to find me. "Ms. Washington." A Coast Guard officer ran up to me. "Are you injured? Where's the graduate student who was with you?" I looked out at the ocean, knowing Mike was somewhere far from here now. "He's gone," I said simply. They searched the island for 3 days, but found no trace of Mike. His car was still hidden in the woods, his belongings still in the research station. To them, it looked like he had simply vanished. The official report said Mike Chen had drowned during the storm. His body was never found, which happens sometimes when people are lost at sea. The Coast Guard crew that had disappeared earlier was also declared lost at sea. I was questioned for hours. Federal investigators wanted to know everything about our research, about the strange readings we had collected, about what happened during the storm. I told them the truth, all of it. They didn't believe me. Ms. Washington, one investigator said, "You've been through a traumatic experience. Sometimes our minds create explanations for things we can't understand. Survivor's guilt can cause people to imagine." I stopped listening. I had expected this. The water samples Mike and I had collected were sent to labs for analysis. When the results came back weeks later, they showed nothing unusual. Just regular bay water with slightly elevated temperatures. The electromagnetic readings were dismissed as equipment malfunction. The photographs of the geometric patterns in the beach grass were explained as natural die-off due to storm surge. Even the sonar readings of the large underwater object were written off as debris displaced by severe weather conditions. Within a month, the official story was complete. 2 people had been lost in a tragic accident during an unusual storm. The strange readings were the result of damaged equipment and traumatized witnesses. Case closed. But I kept Mike's backup drives, and I kept watching the ocean. The first sign that the creature had died came 2 weeks after it disappeared. A massive algae bloom appeared in the deep Atlantic, about 200 miles offshore. Satellite images showed a green stain in the ocean the size of Rhode Island. The bloom lasted for 3 months. Marine biologists said it was the largest they had ever seen, but they couldn't explain what caused it. The official theory was unusual. Water temperatures combined with nutrient runoff. I knew better. The creature had made it to the deep ocean, and its death had released all those accumulated toxins in the safest place possible. The bloom eventually disappeared, and ocean life returned to normal. Better than normal, actually. Fish populations in the mid-Atlantic began to recover. Water quality improved. Sea turtle nesting increased. It was as if the creature's sacrifice had somehow healed the waters. I tried to publish our findings, but no scientific journal would accept the paper. They all gave the same reasons. Lacks sufficient evidence. Conclusions not supported by data. Reads more like fantasy than science. I was politely but firmly pushed out of the marine biology community. Dr. Washington has been under considerable stress, colleagues would whisper. Perhaps she should consider a different career path, so I became an environmental activist instead. I started small, organizing beach cleanups and speaking to local schools about ocean pollution. I never mentioned the creature directly, but I talked about the importance of protecting marine life and keeping toxins out of the water. Slowly, my audience grew. I began speaking at environmental conferences, writing articles about pollution's effects on marine ecosystems. People started listening when I described the delicate balance of ocean life and what happens when that balance is disrupted. I never stopped looking for proof. Every few months I would return to Assateague Island. Officially, I was just a tourist visiting the wildlife refuge. But really I was checking the water temperature, testing for electromagnetic activity, listening for any sounds that didn't belong. The bay was peaceful now. Fish populations were healthy, the water was clear, and the wild ponies had returned to their coastal grazing areas. It was as if nothing had ever happened. But sometimes, on very calm nights, I could see faint lights moving deep under the water. Not the bright patterns the creature had made, but gentle glows that reminded me of stars. I like to think it was Mike, somehow still out there, still protecting the waters he had chosen to join. 5 years after Mike's disappearance, a package arrived at my apartment with no return address. Inside was a small piece of crystalline material that looked like a scale the size of my palm. When I held it up to the light, it shimmered with the same blue-green glow I remembered from the creature. Along with it was a single typed note: "For those who remember the truth." I had the scale analyzed by a private lab. The results were impossible. It was composed of materials that shouldn't exist, in combinations that defied physics. The lab technician called it the most unusual biological sample I've ever seen. I keep the scale on my desk now, where it catches the sunlight streaming through my window. Sometimes visitors ask about it, and I tell them it's from a very special place. That's true, in a way. Last month, a young marine biology student contacted me. She had read some of my environmental articles and wanted to interview me for her thesis on unexplained ocean phenomena. Her name was Dr. Sarah Kim, and she reminded me of myself at that age, passionate, curious, determined to protect marine life. "Dr. Washington," she said during our meeting, "I've been researching historical reports of large marine animals in the Chesapeake Bay area. There are stories going back hundreds of years about something called Chessie. Most scientists dismiss these as folklore, but the descriptions are remarkably consistent." I listened as she described her research. Sightings by reliable witnesses, sonar contacts that couldn't be explained, underwater sounds recorded by submarines. "What do you think it could be?" she asked me. I looked at the scale on my desk, remembering. Mike's voice through the storm, remembering ancient eyes full of sadness and wisdom. "I think," I said carefully, "that the ocean still holds mysteries we don't understand. And maybe that's not a bad thing." Dr. Kim nodded eagerly. "Would you be willing to help with my research? I'm planning an expedition to study water temperature anomalies in the Chesapeake Bay." I smiled, thinking of Mike and his endless enthusiasm for measuring water temperatures. I'd be honored to help. As she left my apartment, I noticed she turned back to look at the crystalline scale one more time. There was something in her expression that reminded me of the way Mike used to look when he was on the verge of a discovery. Maybe some stories are meant to be told again and again, passed from one generation of scientists to the next. Maybe some truths are too important to let die. I picked up the phone and began making plans. After all, the ocean is still out there, and it's still calling. My name is Frank Kowalski, and I'm about to tell you something I've never told anyone before. This happened in 1956, deep in the Olympic rainforest of Washington. I was 41 years old then, working as a forest ranger. But I wasn't always a ranger. Before that, I was a logger. I cut down trees for a living. I'll never forget the last tree I cut down. It was a massive cedar, older than anything I'd ever seen. Must have been 1,000 years old. When it fell, the earth shook. I stood there looking at what I'd done, and something inside me broke. I quit logging that same day. That's how I became a ranger. I figured if I spent the rest of my life protecting forests, maybe I could make up for all the damage I'd done. Maybe. It was a cold morning in October when I entered that valley. The government wanted me to map out a new area of the forest that no one had ever explored before. They gave me surveying equipment, some camping gear, and my faithful packhorse Duke. The plan was simple: cut a trail through the wilderness and mark it on the map. The forest was like nothing I'd ever seen. The trees were giants, reaching up 300 feet into the sky. Their branches were so thick they blocked out most of the sunlight. Everything was covered in a thick layer of moss. The air was always wet, like being inside a green cave that never ended. Water dripped constantly from the leaves above. Drip, drip, drip. Sometimes it was the only sound I heard for hours. The silence was so complete it made my ears ring. Even Duke's hoofbeats were muffled by the soft forest floor. As we went deeper, the trees got bigger. Some were so wide that 10 men holding hands couldn't reach around them. The ferns grew taller than my chest. Everything was green, 50 different. Shades of green I didn't even have names for. Duke started acting strange on the second day. He'd stop suddenly and refuse to move forward. His ears would twitch and he'd shake his head like he was trying to get rid of flies. But there were no flies. It was too cold for that. "What's wrong, boy?" I'd ask him, patting his neck. But Duke just rolled his eyes and pulled at the reins, wanting to go back the way we came. I should have listened to him. On the third day, we came across a clearing where elk had been feeding, but something was wrong. The grass was trampled and broken branches lay everywhere. It looked like the elk had run away in a panic, fast. That's when I noticed how quiet it was. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering. Even the insects had gone silent. The forest was holding its breath. I found some elk tracks leading away from the clearing. They were deep prints, made by animals running as fast as they could. Whatever had scared them was big enough to send a whole herd fleeing. Duke refused to go any further into the clearing. He planted his feet and wouldn't budge no matter how hard I pulled. His whole body was trembling. "Okay, boy," I said. "We'll go round." But as we walked along the edge of the clearing, I felt it. Someone, or something, was watching us. The feeling was so strong it made the hair on my neck stand up. I turned around several times, but all I saw were trees and shadows. That night, I made camp by a small creek. The sound of running water helped cover the sounds my mind was making up in the darkness. Every snap of a twig made me jump. Every whisper of wind through the trees sounded like footsteps. I built the fire bigger than usual and kept my rifle close. Duke stayed as near to the flames as he could get without singing his fur. Neither of us slept much. When morning came, I found footprints around our camp, big ones, much bigger than mine. They circled our sleeping area 3 times before disappearing back into the forest. I knew then that I wasn't alone in this valley. Something lived here, something that didn't want visitors. But I was Frank Kowalski, and I'd never backed down. From anything in my life, my job was to map this place, and that's what I was going to do, even if every instinct I had was screaming at me to pack up Duke and get out of there as fast as we could. I was about to learn that some places are meant to stay unmapped. Some secrets are too dangerous to uncover. And some things in the forest are better left undisturbed. The next morning I found something I'll never forget. Down by the creek where I got water, there were handprints in the mud, but these weren't human handprints. They were huge, bigger than dinner plates. Each finger was as long as a banana. The prints were fresh, maybe made just hours before. I knelt down and put my own hand next to one of them. My hand looked tiny in comparison. Whatever made these, prints had to be massive. I tried to think of what animal could leave such marks, but nothing came to mind. Bears have paws, not hands with fingers. Duke saw me looking at the prints and started backing away from the creek. He wouldn't drink the water, no matter how thirsty he was. I had to lead him upstream before he'd take a sip. As we moved deeper into the valley that day, I found more strange things. Someone, or something, had built a shelter near a fallen log. It wasn't made like any human shelter I'd seen. Thin branches were bent and woven together in a dome shape. Moss covered the outside like a blanket. It looked like it had been there for years. The shelter was big enough for something much larger than a person to crawl inside. I got down on my hands and knees and peered in. It smelled musky like wet fur that hadn't been washed in a long time. The ground inside was worn smooth, like something had been using it regularly. I started noticing other things too. Trees had their bark stripped off in strange patterns, long scratches that were too high up for any normal animal to make. Some of the scratches were 10 feet off the ground. The forest floor was completely clean of small bones and animal remains. In most forests you find old deer bones, bird skeletons, things like that, but here everything had been cleared away. It was too clean, like someone was keeping house. Duke became more nervous with every mile. He'd stop suddenly and turn his Head, ears pointed forward, listening to something I couldn't hear. Sometimes he'd refuse to walk in certain directions. He'd plant his feet and shake his head, snorting through his nostrils. "Come on, boy," I'd say, tugging on his reins. There's nothing there, but Duke knew better than I did. On the fourth day, the smell hit us. It was a thick, musky odor that made my nose wrinkle. It smelled like a mixture of wet dog and something wilder. The smell got stronger as we walked, then weaker, then stronger again, like we were walking in circles around whatever was making it. That's when I realized something that made my blood run cold. We weren't lost. We were being herded. Every time Duke tried to turn left or right, we'd find a fallen tree blocking the path, or thick bushes too dense to push through, or muddy ground that would trap Duke's hooves. The only way forward was straight ahead, deeper into the valley. Someone was guiding us somewhere, and I was pretty sure they didn't want to invite us for dinner. I started hearing sounds, knock, 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 like someone hitting two pieces of wood together. But the sounds came from different directions, sometimes ahead of us, sometimes behind. They followed a pattern, like a code. 3 knocks, then 2, then 5. The same pattern over and over. "Hello?" I called out once. My voice echoed through the trees. The knocking stopped immediately. The silence that followed was so complete it made my ears hurt. Duke's eyes rolled white with fear. Foam formed around his mouth. I'd never seen him this scared, not even during thunderstorms. On the 5th day, I saw it. We were following a game trail through a thick stand of Douglas fir trees. Duke was moving slowly, head down, like he was trying to make himself invisible. The fog had rolled in from the coast, cutting our vision down to maybe 20 feet. Something moved in the trees next to us. Something big. It was keeping pace with us, walking parallel to our path. I caught glimpses of it through the fog. A tall, dark shape that seemed to glide between the trees without making a sound. I stopped. Duke stopped. The shape stopped too. I stared into the fog, trying to see clearly. For just a moment, the fog shifted and I saw an outline. It was tall, really tall, taller than any man I'd ever seen. It had long arms and seemed to be covered in hair. It stood there watching us, just 20 feet away. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. Slowly, I reached for my rifle. The thing must have seen me move because it melted back into the fog like it had never been there at all. I stood there for 10 minutes, rifle ready, waiting for it to come back. But the forest had gone quiet again. Even Duke seemed to relax a little. That night I didn't sleep at all. Every sound made me grab my rifle. Every shadow looked like it was moving. I kept the fire burning bright until dawn, feeding it logs whenever it started to dim. But the worst part wasn't what I saw or heard. It was the feeling that I was being studied, like I was some kind of bug under a magnifying glass. Something was out there, watching my every move, learning about me, deciding what to do with me. I knew I should leave. Pack up Duke and head back the way we came. Report to my supervisor that the terrain was too dangerous to map. But my pride wouldn't let me. I'd never quit a job halfway through, and I wasn't about to start now. Besides, I kept telling myself, I'm probably just seeing things. Spending too much time alone in the woods can play tricks on your mind. There had to be a logical explanation for everything. I was wrong about that. Dead wrong. On the 6th day, everything changed. I was trying to cross a small meadow when Duke suddenly reared up on his back legs. He let out a scream I'd never heard before, high and scared. I fought to control him, pulling on the reins, trying to calm him down. Easy, boy, easy. But Duke wasn't looking at me. He was staring at something behind me. I turned around slowly, my heart already racing. At the edge of the meadow, where the trees began, 3 shapes stood watching us. They weren't trying to hide anymore. The biggest one was in the middle. It had to be 10 feet tall, maybe more. Its whole body was covered in thick, reddish-brown hair that looked coarse and wild. Its shoulders were twice as wide as mine. Its arms hung down almost to its knees. To its left stood a smaller one, maybe 8 feet tall. This one was watching me with what looked like intelligence, like it was thinking about something. Its eyes were dark and deep, almost human. On the right was the smallest, though still bigger than me. This one seemed curious about Duke and me. It kept tilting its head to one side like a dog trying to understand a new sound. They just stood there, not moving, not making any noise, waiting. My hands shook as I reached for my rifle. I'd hunted bears before. I'd faced down angry mountain lions, but this was different. These things looked at me like they knew exactly what I was thinking. The big one in the middle made a sound. It wasn't quite a growl, more like a deep huff that came from its chest. The other two huffed back. They were talking to each other. Duke broke first. He spun around and tried to run, but his pack got caught on a low branch. He thrashed and kicked, trying to get free. I held onto his reins, but he pulled me off my feet. That's when the big one moved. It didn't run like an animal. It walked upright, like a person, but its steps covered twice the ground mine would. In seconds, it was halfway across the meadow. The other two followed, moving just as quietly. I finally got Duke untangled and climbed back to my feet. The three creatures had stopped about 30 feet away from us. Up close, they were even more terrifying. Their faces were almost human, but covered in hair. Their eyes were intelligent, but wild. The big one looked right at me. Then it did something that made my blood freeze. It pointed at me, then pointed back the way I'd come. The message was clear. Leave. Now. I raised my rifle and pointed it at the big one. Stay back, I shouted. The creature tilted its head, studying the rifle like it was trying to figure out what it was. Then it did something I'll never forget. It smiled. Not a friendly smile, a smile that showed its huge teeth. It picked up a rock from the ground, a big rock, probably 50 pounds. With one hand, it hurled that rock like I might throw a baseball. The rock flew past my head and crashed into a tree behind me, splitting the trunk in half. The message was even clearer now. Your little gun doesn't scare me. Duke finally broke free and ran. I mean really ran, faster than I'd ever seen him move. His pack bounced and jostled as he disappeared into the trees, leaving me alone with the three creatures. I backed away slowly, rifle still pointed at them. They followed, matching my pace exactly. For every step I took backward, they took one forward. I don't want any trouble, I said, my voice shaking. I'll leave. I'll go back. The big one huffed again. This time it sounded almost like laughter. That's when I realized I wasn't backing toward the way I'd come. I was backing deeper into the valley. They'd positioned themselves to cut off my escape route. I was being herded again, but this time I could see who was doing it. My foot caught on a fallen branch and I stumbled. I hit the ground hard and my rifle went flying. When I looked up, all three creatures were standing right over me. The big one reached down. Its hand was enormous, covered in thick hair with fingernails like claws. I thought this was it. This was how Frank Kowalski was going to die, but instead of grabbing me, it picked up my rifle. It held it carefully, turning it over in its hands like it was examining it. Then, without any effort at all, it bent the barrel into a pretzel shape and tossed it aside. The smaller one made a series of sounds, huffs and grunts that almost sounded like words. The big one huffed back. They were definitely talking about me. I tried to stand up, but the big one put a hand on my chest and pushed me back down. Not roughly, but firmly. It wanted me to stay put. The curious one came closer. It reached out slowly, like it wanted to touch me. I froze as its finger, thick as a sausage, poked gently at my jacket. It seemed fascinated by the fabric. Then it noticed my surveying equipment, my compass, my measuring tape, my notebooks. It pointed at them and made questioning sounds to the others. I realized something then. They weren't just animals, they were people. Different from us, but people all the same. They had their own language, their own ways. and I had walked into their home without permission. The big one stood up and pointed again toward the way I'd come. But this time there was something different in its gesture. It wasn't just telling me to leave, it was asking me to understand. This valley was their home. They'd been living here long before any human had set foot in it. They didn't want to hurt me, but they couldn't let me stay. They couldn't let me bring others here. I looked up at the three of them. The family, I realized, a father, mother, and their child. They weren't monsters. They were just trying to protect their home. I understand, I said quietly. I started to get up, moving slowly so they wouldn't think I was trying to attack. The big one stepped back, but kept watching me carefully. That's when we heard the sound that changed everything. A loud crack echoed through the forest, then a crash, then a cry of pain. The mother had wandered too close to a dead tree while watching me. When she leaned against it, the rotten trunk snapped. The tree fell, pinning her leg underneath. She cried out, a sound of pure pain that cut through me like a knife. The father rushed to her side, trying to lift the tree. The young one joined in, both of them straining to move the heavy trunk. I stood there for a moment, frozen. I could run. They were all distracted, focused on helping. I could escape while they were busy, but I couldn't do it. I couldn't leave her trapped and hurt. Instead, I ran toward them. "Move back," I shouted, waving my hands at the father and young one. They looked at me like I was crazy. Here I was, running toward them when I should be running away. The father growled and stepped between me and his hurt mate. He wasn't going to let me get close to her, but I had to try. I pointed at the tree, then at myself, then made a lifting motion with my hands. "I can help," I said. "Let me help." The mother was making soft moaning sounds. Her leg was twisted at a bad angle under the tree trunk. I could see it was broken. I walked slowly toward the father, my hands up to show I wasn't carrying any weapons. He watched me with those dark, intelligent eyes. I could see him thinking, trying to decide if he could trust me. "Please," I said, "I know first aid. I can help her." The young one tugged at the father's arm and made urgent, huffing sounds. It seemed to be saying something like, "Let him try." Finally, the father stepped aside. He pointed one thick finger at me, then drew it across his throat. The message was clear: "If you hurt her, I'll kill you." I nodded and rushed to the mother's side. The tree trunk was huge, probably weighed 800 pounds. There was no way the three of us could lift it, even with their incredible strength, but I had an idea. I ran back to where my pack had fallen and grabbed my rope and surveying equipment. I tied one end of the rope around a healthy tree about 20 feet away. Then I ran the other end under the fallen trunk near where it was pinning the mother. "This is called a pulley system," I explained, even though I knew they couldn't understand my words. "We can use it to lift the tree." I showed the father how to pull on the rope while I pushed up on the trunk from underneath. The young one caught on quickly and started pulling too. 1, 2, 3, pull! Slowly, inch by inch, the tree trunk rose. The mother cried out as the weight came off her leg, but then she sighed with relief. "Hold it there," I yelled. The mother dragged herself out from under the tree. When she was clear, we let the trunk fall back down. It hit the ground with a thud that shook the forest floor. Now came the hard part. Her leg was definitely broken. I could see the bone pushing against the skin. If we didn't set it properly, she might never walk again. I opened my first aid kit and pulled out the supplies I'd need. The father watched every move I made. The young one seemed fascinated by the white bandages and metal splints. "This is going to hurt," I said to the mother. She looked at me with those deep eyes and nodded, like she understood. I'd set broken bones before in my logging days. Men got hurt all the time in the woods, and sometimes I was the only one around who knew what to do. But I'd never worked on anyone or anything this size before. I positioned my hands on her leg, feeling for where the bone had snapped. The mother tensed up, preparing for pain. The father leaned closer, watching my every move. "Okay," I whispered. "Here we go." I pulled hard and fast, setting the bone back in place. The mother let out a roar that echoed through the entire valley. Birds flew out of trees a mile away. The father grabbed my shoulder, his claws digging into my jacket. But the bone was set. I could feel it click into place. Working quickly, I splinted her leg with the metal strips from my first aid kit. I wrapped it tight with bandages, making sure the bone couldn't move. The mother lay still, breathing heavily, but the worst part was over. When I finished, I sat back on my heels. The three creatures looked at the bandaged leg, then at me. The father's grip on my shoulder loosened. The young one came closer and touched the white bandages gently. It made soft, questioning sounds. "It'll heal," I said. "In a few months, she'll be walking again. Maybe not as good as before, but she'll walk." The father helped his mate sit up. She tested her weight on the good leg, keeping the hurt one off the ground. Then she did something that nearly brought tears to my eyes. She reached out and touched my face with one huge, gentle finger. It was a thank you, a gesture of gratitude that needed no words. The father stood and looked at me for a long moment. I could see him wrestling with something in his mind. I had helped his family, but I was still an outsider, still a threat to their secret home. Finally, he pointed toward the edge of the valley, but this time his gesture was different. It wasn't angry or threatening. It was sad. He was asking me to leave, but he didn't hate me for coming. I nodded. "I understand." I gathered up my scattered equipment and put it in my pack. My rifle was ruined, bent beyond repair, but that was okay. I didn't think I'd need it anymore. As I prepared to leave, the young one ran to a nearby stream. It came back, carrying a smooth, flat stone in its hands. The stone was perfectly round and felt warm to the touch. The young one handed it to me, a gift, a token of friendship. I pulled out my compass and gave it to the young one. Its eyes lit up as the needle spun and pointed north. It showed the compass to its parents, chattering excitedly. The mother struggled to her feet, leaning on the father for support. All three of them stood together, watching as I shouldered my pack. I walked to the edge of the meadow, then turned back for one last look. The family was still there, standing together in the golden afternoon light filtering through. The trees, I raised my hand in farewell. The young one waved back. Then I walked into the forest, leaving them behind. But I wasn't the same Frank Kowalski who had entered this valley 6 days ago. Something inside me had changed forever. As I walked, I made a decision that would shape the rest of my life. I pulled out my survey notes, my maps, my reports, everything that showed the location of this hidden valley. And one by one, I tore them up and scattered the pieces to the wind. Some places are meant to stay secret. Some families deserve to live in peace, away from a world that would never understand them. But my story with the valley wasn't over. Not by a long shot. When I finally made it out of the forest, I was a mess. My clothes were torn, my face was scratched from branches, and Duke was nowhere to be found. A search party had been looking for me for 2 days. "What happened to you, Frank?" my supervisor asked. "Where are your survey notes, your maps?" I looked him straight in the eye and lied. The terrain was too dangerous. Lost my equipment crossing a river, nearly drowned. The area can't be mapped safely. He believed me. Why wouldn't he? I'd never lied to him before. That night, alone in my cabin, I took out the smooth stone the young Sasquatch had given me. I rolled it around in my hands, feeling its warmth. It reminded me that what happened in that valley was real, not a dream, or a trick of my mind. But I had a problem. The mother's leg needed checking. In the wild, a broken bone could get infected. She could die if it didn't heal right. So exactly 1 year later, I went back. I told my supervisor I was taking vacation. Time to do some personal hiking. I packed medical supplies, antibiotics, and clean bandages in my backpack. Then I hiked back into that hidden valley. Finding them wasn't hard. They were living in the same area, near the meadow where I'd first seen them. The young one spotted me first and made excited huffing sounds. The father and mother came out from behind the trees. The mother was walking. She had a slight limp, but she was walking. When she saw me, she sat down and pulled up her leg to show me. The break had healed perfectly. I checked her over, rewrapped the leg with fresh bandages, and gave them supplies. Soap, medicine, clean cloth. Things they could use. They seemed happy to see me. The young one had grown bigger and stronger. It still carried my compass everywhere, even though it didn't know what the numbers meant. I stayed for 3 days, then left again, but not before promising, in gestures and simple words, that I'd come back. And I did. Every year for the next 33 years, I made that trip. Sometimes the weather was bad and I couldn't find them. Sometimes I was too sick to make the journey. But most years I made it. I watched the young one grow up, become an adult. I was there when it had children of its own. The family grew to 5, then 7. They built better shelters, found safer places to live within the valley. They started, leaving gifts for me. Smooth stones, carved pieces of wood, wildflowers. I brought them things too. Fruit they couldn't find in the forest, medicines, warm blankets for the winter. We never learned to speak each other's language with words, but we understood each other just fine. The father got old, his hair turning, grey around his face. The mother's limp got worse some years, better in others, but they stayed healthy. They stayed hidden, and I kept their secret. People at work thought I was strange. "Where do you go every year, Frank?" they'd ask. "You disappear for a week and come back different somehow." I'd just smile and tell them I liked hiking alone. They eventually stopped asking. In 1989, I knew I was dying. The cancer had spread too far for the doctors to stop. I was 74 years old and my body was giving up. I made one last trip to the valley. It was harder this time. I had to stop and rest. Every few minutes, but I made it. The family was there, waiting like they always were. But now there were 9 of them, 3 generations living together. The original young one was now a parent, teaching its own children the ways of the forest. They knew I was sick. I don't know how, but they knew. The old mother, she was ancient now, her fur completely grey, came to me and touched my face with that same gentle finger. She was saying goodbye. I gave them my last gift, 3 thick blankets and a full bag of medicine. Then I sat with them for hours, just watching the young ones play, listening to their huffs and calls, memorizing their faces. When it was time to leave, I knew I'd never see them again. But I wasn't worried. They'd survived for thousands of years before I came along. They'd survive long after I was gone. Back home, I had one last thing to do. Wrote everything down. Every detail of my meetings with the Sasquatch family. Their location, their habits, their trust in me. But I couldn't leave it where just anyone could find it. So I wrote it in code, using a system I'd learned in the army. Then I hid the journal in a secret compartment in my cabin wall. I died 6 months later, peaceful in my sleep. My nephew inherited my cabin. He'd always been curious about my yearly trips, about the stories I wouldn't tell. While cleaning out my belongings, he found the hidden journal. It took him 3 years to crack the code. When he finally understood what I'd written, he drove out to the valley. He hiked for days, following my directions, but he never found them. Maybe they'd moved on. Maybe they sensed he wasn't me and stayed hidden. Or maybe they knew their secret was safe with me and they didn't need to trust anyone else. My nephew kept the journal for 10 years before deciding what to do with it. Eventually, he gave it to a local university, but he made them promise to keep the exact location secret. That's how this story came to light. The family might still be out there in some hidden valley where the old trees grow thick and the modern world can't reach, living their quiet lives, raising their children, keeping to the ancient ways. Part of me hopes they are. The world needs places like that valley, places where wild things can live without fear, where old secrets stay buried, where magic still exists. But if you ever find yourself in the deep woods and you smell something musky on the wind, if you hear knocking sounds in the trees, if you feel like you're being watched, remember my story. Some things are better left alone. Some secrets are worth keeping, and sometimes the most important choice you can make is to walk away and stay quiet. That smooth stone the young Sasquatch gave me, my nephew has it now. He keeps it on his desk as a reminder that there are still mysteries in this world, still things we don't understand, still families trying to live in peace, far from people like us. And that, maybe, is exactly how it should be. My name is Carlos Mendoza, and I've been a park ranger at Big Bend National Park for almost 10 years now. That night in 1967, under the full moon that my grandmother always called the Lechuza moon, changed everything I thought I knew about the world. It started like any other patrol. The desert was painted silver by moonlight, stretching out forever under a sky so clear you could see every single star. The tall saguaro cacti stood like old soldiers guarding the horizon, their arms reaching up toward the heavens. I was on horseback, riding my Palomino mare through the most remote part of the park, near the Mexican border, where few people ever go. The night was cool for October, maybe 60 degrees. I could smell the sage and mesquite in the air, mixed with the promise of rain from clouds too far away to see. Down in the canyon, the Rio Grande whispered its ancient song, flowing between walls of rock that had stood there for millions of years. My partner, Juan Morales, rode beside me on his black stallion. We were investigating reports of cattle being killed in strange ways. Ranchers along the border were scared. They said something was taking their animals, but not eating them like coyotes or mountain lions would. They said it was something else, entirely. Juan was older than me, maybe 50, with gray streaking his black hair. He'd been tracking animals in this desert since he was a boy. His father taught him, and his father's father before that. If Juan couldn't figure out what was killing those cattle, then it was something that had never been seen before. "You nervous, Carlos?" Juan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Even in the open desert, we both felt like we should be quiet. "Should I be?" I asked back, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Juan just pointed up at the full moon. "My grandmother used to say, never go out on a night like this. She called it the Lechuza moon." I knew that word, lechuza. It meant owl in Spanish, but when the old people said it, they meant something much worse. They meant witch. They meant danger. They meant things that should not exist. "You don't believe in that old stuff, do you, Juan?" I asked. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I believe in being careful." I understood. See, I was caught between two worlds my whole life. My father was Mexican, and my mother was half Apache. I grew up hearing stories from both sides of my family. Stories about spirits that lived in the desert. Stories about witches that could turn into animals. Stories about things that hunted when the moon was full. But I also went to school. I learned about science and facts and logic. When I became a park ranger, I told myself I was a modern man. I carried a radio and a flashlight and a first aid kit. I didn't need to worry about old wives' tales. Still, on that night, with the moon so bright it cast shadows, I found myself touching the silver cross my grandmother had given me. It hung on a chain around my neck, hidden under my uniform shirt. Just in case. We'd been riding for about 2 hours when my horse started acting strange. Palomino was usually calm, but now she kept tossing her head and snorting. Her ears were pricked forward, and I could feel her muscles tense beneath me. "Easy, girl," I whispered, patting her neck, but I was looking around too, trying to see what had spooked her. That's when I heard them. Owls, lots of owls. They were calling from every direction, their hoots echoing off the canyon walls. It was beautiful and terrible at the same time. I'd never heard so many owls in one place before. Juan pulled his horse closer to mine. "That's not normal," he said. I had to agree. In all my years patrolling this desert, I'd never heard anything like it. The owl calls seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere. They surrounded us like invisible watchers. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, but it seemed weak against the silver moonlight. I swept it back and forth, looking for eyes reflecting back at me. And I found them. Lots of them. Too many of them. Yellow eyes watching us from the shadows of rocks and bushes. "Juan," I said quietly, "look." He followed my flashlight beam and saw them too. Dozens of pairs of eyes, all staring at us, but they weren't moving. They weren't running away like normal animals would. They were just watching. My radio crackled with static. I tried to call back to headquarters, but all I got was white noise. Even that felt wrong somehow. It sounded almost like someone crying very far away. "Maybe we should head back," Juan said. For the first time since I'd known him, he sounded scared, but I was stubborn. I was the ranger here. It was my job to investigate, not run away from shadows and sounds. "We came here to find out what's been killing the cattle," I said. "Let's find out." Juan nodded, but I could see he didn't like it. Neither did I, truth be told. But I had a job to do, and I was going to do it. We urged our horses forward, deeper into the desert, deeper into the silver light of the Lechuza moon. Behind us, the owls kept calling, and all those yellow eyes kept watching. I should have listened to my grandmother's warnings. I should have turned around right then and ridden back to safety, but I didn't. And because of that, Juan and I were about to discover that some of the old stories are true. All of them. We rode for another hour before we found the first dead cow. It was lying in a clearing between two big rocks, and right away I knew something was wrong. Very wrong. The cow was a big black Angus, probably weighed 800 pounds when it was alive. But now it looked empty, like a balloon with all the air let out. Its skin was loose and grey, hanging off its bones like an old coat. "Jesus!" Juan whispered, crossing himself. He stayed on his horse while I climbed down to take a closer look. I've seen dead animals before, lots of them. Coyotes, mountain lions, bears. They all kill differently, but they leave signs. Bite marks, claw marks, blood everywhere. This was different. The cow's belly had been cut open, but not ripped. It was a clean cut, like someone used a sharp knife, and there was no blood, not a drop, not on the ground, not on the cow, nowhere. That's impossible. When something dies, there's always blood. "Carlos," Juan called from his horse. His voice was tight. "Look at this." I walked over to where he was pointing his flashlight. There, stuck in a crack in the rock, was a feather. But it wasn't like any feather I'd ever seen. It was almost 2 feet long and pure white with black spots near the tip. It felt soft as silk when I touched it. "That's an owl feather," Juan said. "But no owl around here is that big." He was right. The biggest owls in Texas have feathers maybe 8 inches long. This thing could have come from a bird the size of a small airplane. We found 2 more dead cows as we rode deeper into the desert. Each one was the same. Cut open clean, no blood, skin hanging loose. And near each one we found more of those huge white feathers. "Maybe it's some kind of new disease," I said, trying to find a normal explanation. "Something that makes the blood disappear." Juan just looked at me like I was crazy. "Carlos, blood doesn't just disappear. And diseases don't cut cows open with a knife." I knew he was right, but I didn't want to accept it. I was trained to find logical answers. There had to be something I was missing. That's when our horses started acting up again. Both Palomino and Juan's stallions stopped dead in their tracks. Their ears went back, and they snorted like they smelled something terrible. But I couldn't smell anything except the normal desert smells. "What's wrong with them?" I asked. Juan tried to make his horse go forward, but it wouldn't budge. It just stood there, shaking its head and pawing the ground. "They don't want to go that way," he said, pointing ahead into a narrow canyon. I tried to get Palomino to move forward too, but she backed up instead. These were good horses, trained horses. They weren't scared of coyotes or snakes or lightning. But something ahead in that canyon had them terrified. We'll go around, I decided, but as we started to change direction, my radio crackled to life. At first, it was just static. Then, through the white noise, I heard something that made my blood run cold. It was a woman's voice, crying, not crying like someone sad, crying like someone in terrible pain. She was calling out in a language I didn't recognize, not Spanish, not English, not even Apache. "Are you getting this?" I asked Juan, holding up my radio. He nodded, his face pale in the moonlight. "Turn it off," he said, but I couldn't. I was frozen listening to that voice. The woman sounded like she was begging for something. Her voice got louder and more desperate until it was almost screaming. Then it stopped. Just silence. I finally managed to turn off the radio, but my hands were shaking. "That came from somewhere." "Out here," I said. "We should investigate." "No," Juan said firmly. "We should go back to town right now." I wanted to argue, but then I noticed something else. Around us, scattered in a perfect circle, were dead plants, desert grass, small bushes, even a prickly pear cactus, all brown and withered like they'd been dead for years. But yesterday, when I'd ridden this same trail, everything here had been green and alive. In the center of the dead circle was a pile of smooth white stones. They were arranged in a pattern that hurt my eyes to look at directly. It seemed familiar, somehow like I'd seen it before in a dream. "Juan," I said quietly, "look at the ground." He saw what I saw. In the sand around the stones were footprints, but they weren't human footprints. They were shaped like a bird's feet, but huge. Each footprint was as big as a dinner plate, with deep scratches from claws. Juan's horse suddenly reared up on its back legs, making a sound I'd never heard a horse make before. It was like screaming and neighing at the same time. Juan fought to stay in the saddle while the horse spun in circles, trying to run away. That's when I saw it. High up in the sky, something was moving against the stars. It was big and dark, flying in circles above us, but there was no sound of wings. No bird that size could fly without making noise. "Do you see that?" I whispered to Juan. He looked up and went very still. "That's not a bird," he said. The thing in the sky was getting lower. As it got closer, I could see it was huge, maybe 15 feet from one wingtip to the other, but it moved too smoothly, too quietly, and it was watching us. I could feel its eyes on us like a cold touch. Juan's compass, which he always kept, clipped to his belt, started spinning wildly. The needle whirled around and around, never settling on north. My watch had stopped too, I noticed. The hands were frozen at 11:43. "We need to get out of here," Juan said. "Now!" I wanted to stay and figure out what was happening. Part of me, the park ranger part, said I needed to investigate. But the other part, the part that remembered my grandmother's stories, was screaming at me to run. Then we heard the laughter. It came from the canyon where our horses wouldn't go. A child's laughter, high and sweet and completely wrong in this dead place. It echoed off the rocks and seemed to come from everywhere at once. That's when Juan and I looked at each other and made the same decision. We turned our horses around and rode away as fast as we could. But even as we galloped back toward the main trail, I could feel something following us. Something big and silent and patient. And I knew, deep in my bones, that whatever was out there wasn't done with us yet. We didn't stop running until we reached the old line shack about 3 miles away. It was a small wooden building that rangers used when they had to stay out overnight. Juan and I tied up our horses and went inside without saying a word. The shack had 2 cots, a table, and a wood stove. I lit a kerosene lamp while Juan checked. The radio, nothing but static. Even the emergency channel was dead. "We should have gone back to town," Juan said, sitting heavily on one of the cots. His hands were shaking as he rolled a cigarette. "We can't drive in the dark on these roads," I said. "You know that. One wrong turn, and we'd go right off a cliff." But really, I didn't want to leave. Not yet. I needed to understand what we'd seen. My logical mind kept trying to explain it all away. Maybe the cows had some disease. Maybe the feathers were from a bird that had blown in from somewhere else. Maybe the thing in the sky was just a plane. But I couldn't explain the child's laughter. I couldn't explain why our horses were still nervous, even safe inside their rope corral. And I couldn't explain the feeling I had that something was watching. As Juan lit his cigarette and took a long drag. "My grandmother told me stories about the lechuza when I was little," he said quietly. "I thought they were just stories to keep kids from wandering off at night." "What kind of stories?" I asked, even though part of me didn't want to know. She said there were witches who could turn into owls, bigger than any natural bird. They hunted people on nights when the moon was full. They could steal your voice, your memory, even your soul. I sat down across from him. "You don't really believe that?" Juan looked at me with tired eyes. "A week ago I would have said no. Tonight, I don't know what I believe anymore." I was about to answer when we heard it. A sound like wind through trees, but there was no wind. It was soft at first, then louder. It was coming from outside, moving around the shack in slow circles. Our horses started making noise, not whinnying or snorting like before, but a low, frightened sound I'd never heard horses make. They sounded like they were trying to be quiet, trying not to be noticed. Juan stubbed out his cigarette and picked up his rifle. I grabbed mine too. We moved to the small window and looked out. At first I didn't see anything. The moon was still bright, casting long shadows across the desert. Then one of the shadows moved. It was big and dark and wrong. It flowed across the ground like water, but shadows don't move on their own. "There," Juan whispered, pointing. I saw it then. On top of a big rock about 50 yards away sat the largest owl I'd ever seen. But calling it an owl was like calling a mountain a hill. It had to be 15 feet tall, with wings that spread even wider. Its feathers shone in the moonlight like they were made of silver. But the worst part was its face. It wasn't the face of a bird. It was the face of a woman, beautiful but terrible, with dark eyes that seemed to see right through us. She was looking directly at our window, and when our eyes met, she smiled. I felt something cold crawl up my spine. That smile wasn't human. It was the smile of something that knew secrets, dark secrets that people weren't supposed to know. The creature opened its beak and spoke. Its voice was like music, like the most beautiful song you ever heard. But it spoke in a language that was older than Spanish, older than English, maybe older than any language still spoken by living people. "What's it saying?" I whispered. Juan's face had gone white. "I don't know. But my grandmother, she taught me a few words in the old tongue. I think it's calling your name." That couldn't be right. But as I listened, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Hidden in those musical, ancient words, I heard it. Carlos Mendoza. The creature knew my name. It knew who I was. It spread its massive wings and rose into the air without making a sound. No flapping, no rush of wind, nothing. It just lifted off the rock like gravity didn't apply to it. It circled the shack once, twice, 3 times. Each time it passed over us, I felt pressure in my head, like someone was trying to get inside my thoughts. Then it landed on the roof. The whole building shook under its weight. We could hear its claws scratching against the wood as it walked. Around up there, dust fell from the ceiling onto our heads. It was testing the roof, I realized, looking for weak spots, looking for a way in. Juan grabbed my arm. "The chimney," he whispered. I looked up at the stovepipe that went through the roof. It was easily big enough for something to come down through. Juan was already moving, stuffing rags into the pipe opening. That's when the creature started talking again. But this time, it spoke in perfect English. Its voice was different now, not the beautiful singing voice from before, but the voice of an old woman, a grandmother's voice. "Carlos, mijo," it said sweetly. "Why are you hiding from me? I just want to talk to you." It sounded exactly like my grandmother, exactly. The same accent, the same way of saying my name. My grandmother had died 5 years ago, But hearing that voice, I almost believed she was really there. "Don't listen," Juan hissed. "It's not her. It's not real." But the voice kept talking. "I have something to tell you, Carlos, about your brother, about how he really died. Don't you want to know the truth? My brother Miguel had been killed 2 years ago in a fight with smugglers near the border. At least, that's what the police told us. But there had always been questions, things that didn't add up. Carlos," the voice continued, and now it sounded sad. "I tried to warn him, I tried to save him, but he wouldn't listen. Just like you're not listening now." I took a step toward the door. Juan grabbed my arm harder. "It's lying," he said. "Whatever it is, it's lying." But I wanted to hear more. I needed to know about Miguel. The voice seemed to read my thoughts. "Come outside, mijo. Let me tell you what really happened. Let me show you." The scratching on the roof stopped. Everything went quiet except for the sound of my heart beating in my ears. Then we heard something that made us both freeze. The creature was laughing. Not the child's laughter we'd heard before. This was deeper, older, full of secrets and hunger. It was the laughter of something that had been waiting a very long time and was finally going to get what it wanted. "You can't hide in there forever. Carlos Mendoza," it said. And now its voice was completely different, cold and sharp like broken glass. "I know who you are. I know your blood. I know your family's shame." Juan looked at me. "Your family's shame? What's it talking about?" I didn't answer because I didn't know, but somewhere deep inside, in a place I'd tried to forget, I had a feeling that I was about to find out. We sat in that shack for what felt like hours, listening to the creature move around on the roof. Sometimes it would scratch with its claws. Sometimes it would walk from one end to the other, making the whole building creak. And sometimes it would just sit there, completely quiet, which was somehow worse than the noise. Juan dozed off around 3 in the morning, his rifle still in his hands. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that voice calling my name. I kept thinking about Miguel, about what the creature had said about knowing how he really died. The attack came just before dawn. I was looking out the window, watching the sky start to turn gray in the east, when I saw Juan's horse rear up and break free from the rope corral. It ran off into the desert wild with fear. Then I couldn't see Juan's other horse, the black stallion. "Juan," I whispered, shaking his shoulder. "Wake up! Something's wrong!" He opened his eyes and immediately reached for his rifle. That's when we heard it, a horrible sound from outside. It was Juan's horse, but it sounded like it was in terrible pain. The sound cut off suddenly, leaving only silence. "We need to check on the horses," Juan said, but his voice was shaking. "No," I said, "it's waiting for us to come outside." But even as I said it, I knew we couldn't stay in the shack forever. We had to get back to town, and we needed the horses. To do it, the truck was back at headquarters, 20 miles away. Juan checked his rifle and made sure it was loaded. I did the same with mine. We had 6 bullets each, not much against a creature like that, but it was all we had. "On 3, Juan said, his hand on the door handle. 1, 2. He threw open the door and we rushed outside. Palomino was still there, trembling but alive. But Juan's black stallion was gone. In its place was a pile of bones, clean white bones with no meat on them, arranged in a neat pile like someone had taken the horse apart piece by piece and put the bones in order. "Dear God," Juan whispered, crossing himself. That's when the creature dropped from the sky. It came down right between us and the horses, landing without a sound. Up close, it was even more terrible than before. Its feathers weren't silver like I'd thought. They were white with black edges, and they seemed to move on their own like they were alive. Its woman's face was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at, with skin like pale marble and eyes like black stars. It stood there for a moment, looking at us. Then it spoke, and its voice was like honey and poison mixed together. "Hello, Carlos. I've been waiting to meet you properly. I raised my rifle, but my hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold it. What are you? What do you want? The creature tilted its head like a real owl. I'm what your people call lechuza. I'm older than your grandmother's grandmother's grandmother. And what I want is for you to remember. Remember who you really are. It took a step closer. Your great-great-grandmother was Apache. She knew the old ways. She made a promise to my kind, a promise that your family has forgotten. I didn't understand what it was talking about. My mother had told me some stories about our Apache ancestors, but nothing about promises to witches. You're lying, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The creature laughed, and the sound made my teeth ache. Am I? Then why can you hear me? Speak in the old tongue? Why do you understand words you were never taught? It was right. Somehow I could understand the strange language it had spoken before. The words appeared in my mind like memories I'd forgotten. This sacred ground, the creature continued, pointing with one wing toward the canyon where our horses wouldn't go. Your people built their buildings on it. They dug up the graves of my guardians. They broke the old promises. I don't know anything about any promises, Juan said, his rifle aimed at the creature's chest. The lechuza turned its terrible gaze on him. You don't need to, little tracker. You're not of the blood. But Carlos is different. It looked back at me, and suddenly I felt dizzy. Images flashed through my mind, old memories that weren't mine. I saw the desert as it was hundreds of years ago. I saw Apache warriors burying their dead in the sacred canyon. I saw them making some kind of agreement with creatures of shadow and wing. Your ancestor promised to protect this place, the lechuza said. In return, my kind would leave your people in peace, but the promise was broken, and now someone must pay. That has nothing to do with me, I said, but my voice sounded weak even to my own ears. Doesn't it? Your brother Miguel found out about the old agreement. He came to me for help when the smugglers threatened your family. I offered him power, protection for those he loved, but he refused. He said he didn't believe in the old ways. My blood went cold. You killed Miguel? I offered him a choice. He chose to die rather than honor his family's promise. The creature's eyes seemed to glow. Now I offer the same choice to you. Juan stepped forward, his rifle still aimed at the creature. Carlos, don't listen to this thing. It's trying to confuse you. The lechuza turned to Juan and smiled. You think your little gun can hurt me, tracker? Before Juan could answer, the creature moved. It was so fast I barely saw it happen. One moment Juan was standing next to me. The next he was flying through the air like he'd been hit by a truck. He crashed into the side of the shack and didn't. Get up. Juan! I ran to him. He was breathing but unconscious, blood running from a cut on his head. He'll live, the lechuza said calmly. For now, but that depends on what you choose, Carlos Mendoza. I turned to face it, my rifle in my hands. What choice? Come with me. Learn the old ways. Help me protect the sacred places. Do this. And your friend lives. Your fiancé in town stays safe. Refuse. It shrugged its massive wings. Well, you've seen what happened to your brother. I thought about Maria, my fiancée, waiting for me back in town. I thought about Juan, hurt because he'd tried to help me. I thought about Miguel, who had died trying to protect our family. I need time to think, I said. The creature nodded like it had expected this. You have until the sun rises fully. Meet me at the sacred canyon. Come alone. Decide then whether you will honor your family's debt or join your brother in death. It spread its wings and took to the air, but before it flew away, it spoke one more time. Oh, and Carlos, don't try to run. I can find you anywhere now. You belong to me until you make your choice. Then it was gone, disappearing into the gray morning sky. I knelt beside Juan, checking his pulse. He was alive, but hurt bad. I needed to get him to a doctor, but I also knew the creature was right. I couldn't run. Somehow I could feel its presence in my mind, like a cold pressure behind my eyes. The sun was getting brighter. I probably had an hour, maybe less, before it was.
Fully up.
An hour to decide whether to give my life to a creature of legend or watch everyone I loved die. I looked at Juan's pale face and made my decision. I was going to the sacred canyon. But I wasn't going to surrender. I was going to fight, even if it killed me. I dragged Juan inside the shack and made him as comfortable as I could. He was still breathing steady, which was good. I left him a note in case he woke up before I got back. It said where I'd gone and told him to ride back to town. If I didn't return by noon, then I saddled Palomino and rode toward the sacred canyon. My horse didn't want to go that direction, but I pushed her forward. I could feel the lechuza waiting for me, like a cold spot in my mind that wouldn't go away. The sun was almost up now. The sky was turning from gray to pink to gold. Usually, I loved desert sunrises, but this one might be my last. As I rode, I thought about my grandmother. Not the voice the creature had used to trick me, but the real woman who had raised me after my parents died. She told me stories about both sides of my family, the Mexican side and the Apache side. She'd taught me prayers in Spanish and songs. In Apache, she'd given me the silver cross I still wore around my neck. When you're scared, mijo, she used to say, remember that you come from strong people, people who survived terrible things. Their strength is in your blood. I reached into my shirt and touched the cross. It felt warm against my skin. The canyon entrance was just ahead. I could see why the horses didn't like this place. It felt wrong somehow, like the air was too thick to breathe properly. The rocks looked normal, but there was something about the shadows between them that made my skin crawl. I tied Palomino to a tree far enough away that she'd be safe, but close enough that I could get to her if I needed to run. Then I walked into the canyon alone. It was quiet inside, too quiet. No birds, no insects, no sound of wind, just the echo of my footsteps on the rocky ground. The deeper I went, the older everything looked. The rocks had strange marks carved into them, not words, but pictures that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. Then I found it, the sacred burial ground. It was in a circular clearing at the end of the canyon. The ground was covered with smooth white stones arranged in patterns. In the center was a raised area where the Apache had buried their dead, but someone had dug it up. Big machines had torn through the ancient graves, leaving holes and scattered bones. I felt sick looking at it. No wonder the lechuza was angry. This was like someone taking a sledgehammer to a church. You see now, said a voice behind me. I turned around. The lechuza was there, standing on a rock ledge about 20 feet away. In the growing daylight, it looked even more impossible. Its white feathers seemed to glow with their own light, and its woman's face was beautiful and terrible at the same time. Who did this? I asked, pointing at the ruined graves. Your government. They wanted to build a road through here. When the Apache complained, they were told the burial ground didn't exist, that it was just old stories. The creature's voice was sad now. So the machines came and dug up the bones of warriors and children alike. I felt ashamed, even though I hadn't been there when it happened. I'm sorry, I said, this is wrong. Sorry doesn't bring back the dead, Carlos. Sorry doesn't heal sacred ground. The lechuza jumped down from the ledge, landing silently in front of me. Only blood can do that. My blood, your family's blood. Your ancestor promised to protect this place. The promise was written in blood and sealed with ceremony. When it was broken, the debt passed to the next generation, and the next until it reached you. I thought about Miguel, who had refused and died for it. I thought about Juan lying hurt in the shack. I thought about Maria back in town, probably wondering why I hadn't called. What if I agree? I asked. What happens then? The lechuza smiled, and I saw that her teeth were sharp like a bird's beak. You become my guardian. You help me protect the sacred places from those who would harm them. You learn the old ways, the old power. And my human life, my job, my fiancé, gone. You would belong to the desert, to the ancient places. Your human life would end. I looked around at the destroyed burial ground, at the scattered bones of people who had been buried, here with honor hundreds of years ago. Then I looked up at the rising sun, painting the canyon walls gold and red. Suddenly, I understood something my grandmother had tried to teach me long ago, about honoring both sides of my heritage, about finding strength in all parts of who I was. I have another idea, I said. The lechuza tilted her head. Oh? I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small bottle of holy water that my grandmother had given me years ago. She'd made me promise to always carry it. I also took off my silver cross. My Apache ancestors made a promise to protect this place, I said. But my Mexican ancestors taught me that some promises can be kept in different ways. The creature's eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? I opened the bottle of holy water and began to speak. But I didn't speak in English or Spanish. The words that came out of my mouth were in Apache, words I didn't even know I remembered. They were words about protection and respect, about honoring the dead and keeping the sacred places safe. As I spoke, I sprinkled the holy water on the ground. The lechuza hissed and stepped back. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "I'm keeping my family's promise," I said, but in my own way. I continued the Apache blessing, mixing it with a Spanish prayer my grandmother had taught me. The silver cross in my hand grew warm, then hot. The lechuza tried to move closer, but something was stopping her. "You can't trick me with your mixed blood magic," she snarled. "It's not a trick," I said. "It's who I am. Apache, Mexican, American, all of it. And all of it gives me the right to protect this place." I finished the blessing and held up the silver cross. It was glowing now with a soft white light. The lechuza shielded her eyes. "I promise you," I said in a loud, clear voice, "I will make sure this place is protected. Not as your slave, but as a guardian who chooses to serve. The government will restore this burial ground. No more roads, no more machines. The dead will rest in peace." The lechuza stared at me for a long moment. Then, to my surprise, she smiled. Not the terrible smile from before, but something almost human. "You are cleverer than your brother," she said, "and braver than your ancestor. Very well, Carlos Mendoza. Keep your promise your way. But know this, I will be watching. If you fail, if this place is harmed again, I will come for you and all you love." She spread her massive wings. "And if you succeed, perhaps the old debts can finally be paid." The lechuza took to the air and flew in 3 circles around the canyon. With each circle, she got smaller and more distant. On the 3rd circle, she let out a cry that echoed off the walls like thunder. Then she was gone, disappearing into the bright morning sky. I stood there for a moment, holding my warm silver cross, breathing hard. The sun was fully up now, and the canyon didn't feel quite as cold and wrong as it had before. I walked back to Palomino and rode to the shack as fast as I could. Juan was awake when I got there, sitting up and holding his head. "Carlos," he said, squinting at me in the sunlight. "What happened?" I remember something big hit me. Then everything went black. "You fell off your horse," I said. "Hit your head on a rock. Do you remember anything else?" Juan thought for a moment, then shook his head. "No, just I had the strangest dream about owls, giant owls." "Dreams can be weird after a head injury," I said. "We should get you to a doctor." As we rode back toward town, Juan didn't ask about his missing horse or the pile of bones. He didn't seem to remember any of it. Maybe that was for the best, but I remembered everything, and I kept my promise. It took 2 years and a lot of paperwork, but I got that burial ground protected as a federal historic site. No roads, no development, ever. I left the Park Service and became a cultural liaison, helping to protect sacred sites throughout Texas and New Mexico. I married Maria, and we had 3 children. I told them stories about both sides of their heritage, the Apache side and the Mexican side. I taught them to respect the old places and the old ways, and sometimes on nights when the moon is full, I find white feathers on my doorstep. Very large white feathers with black spots on the tips. I keep them in a special box and remember that some promises are worth keeping, no matter how strange they might seem. I never saw the lechuza again, but I know she's out there, watching over the sacred places, making sure the old agreements are honored. And every now and then, when I'm out in the desert alone, I hear owls calling in the distance. And I smile, because I know the dead are sleeping peacefully and the sacred places are safe. Some debts can only be paid with blood, but some can be paid with honor, respect, and the courage to remember who you really are.